if
Press
we're
play.
okay. It says
We
we're
are
live. Okay, so before I do my introduction, gentlemen, and if there's going to be anybody joining us in the chat, so if I can just make a couple of things clear. If you've got any questions for Ramon, just post them in the questions and we'll get to them. I've been told, Ramon, that there's going to be a few people that are going to come on and participate in the show, so that's good. And there will be some questions asked. So, but we want to take advantage of your time, keep the conversation flowing. So, and we're happy to have your time. So, if I can just do my introduction, the British Electric Blues Show has the pleasure this evening of having the presence of Ramon Goose. Ramon is the creator and presenter of the Guitar Show YouTube channel. Besides being a YouTuber, Ramon is a gigging musician as well. Now, I first became aware of Ramon's channel approximately 2 years ago when I was searching for information on Peter Green. Ramon's channel, The Guitar Show, came up on my newsfeed, and obviously I took a look at what he had to say and offer. I was excited, and to be honest, I was a little bit giddy. You see, I was diving deep back into the British blues scene. I wasn't looking for lessons. I was searching for people who had an opinion and a perspective to offer, that they actually were saying something that mattered. Ramon was one and continues to be one that is unique. Ramon bridges the guitar lessons content of his channel with a presentation of videos that's deeply enriched with his guitar playing perspective. Ramon's archaeology into the blues legends, not to mention his outstanding video production, is a legacy in itself. Our channel began as a couple of cats talking about the Rolling Stones and British blues. We took seriously the discussions we were having, and without sounding egotistical, we realized that social media and the opinions of ordinary fans in regards to music would offer some research material for generations to come. On the one hand, you have the official information of the recognized establishment, their authors and their reporters, and on the other hand, you have the opinions and the research done by organic intellectuals, the real fans, the people that bought and buy the records, that wore out the cassette tapes, the people that bought the guitars and played the music that they were hearing. It's our opinions and our experiences that matter, and social media gives us a voice. It's important to have fun, but when I read the biographies of Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, Peter Green, Mick Fleetwood, and the articles about Mick Taylor, you get a real sense of the seriousness that these cats had when they were studying the blues. It wasn't a joke. They had a bit of fun, but it was serious work, and it's that seriousness that we like to offer in our channel as a homage to the British blues giants. Welcome, Ramon.
Hi, good morning for me, and good evening, I guess, for you guys, yeah?
Awesome.
Good morning for me too.
Yes, Simon, yes. Fantastic. Yeah, really good to be here, and thank you for asking me on your show. Thank you.
So, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, Ramon, about your background and your musical background?
Yeah, I guess. It started in Essex. We were just talking before we went on air.
Home of the blues. Yeah,
Essex. I mean, there is actually a thing called Essex Delta, and that's more towards Tilbury, if you know the geography of England, the Thames estuary, and there's
Dr. Feelgood and all of that.
Canvey Island. There was Dr. Feelgood. There was Alison Moyet, came from Wilko Johnson, all those guys.
Yeah.
And also, there's kind of a bit of a tradition in Southend. It's a place called Southend, which is. Have you heard of a film called Essex Boys?
Yep.
And that was based on some murders which happened in the sort of crime world.
That's right.
And that was based in Southend. So a lot of people around the world might know Southend. But there's an amazing music scene. Despite the crime, there's an amazing music scene there.
Yeah. for the murders.
Yeah, and there's a pub I think it's called the Railway, which I have played in the past and may even do in the future. But it's some really great bands and a lot of musicians that teach in the universities in London, the music colleges in London, live in Southend. So you get these incredible sax players and guitar players, jazz, you know, but I was brought up in North Essex, just on the Suffolk border. And
whereabouts, Roman?
In Colchester.
My grandmother used to live in Pedmarsh, which is near Halstead.
Oh yeah, Halstead. Yes, that's near.
Yeah.
And I think Colchester's claim to fame is Blur, a pop band called Blur came from there. So I think that's it.
Song number 2.
That's it. Yeah. So it's not really a kind of there's not really much blues. It wasn't much blues happening there, but there's a music college in Colchester, and there were some great pubs back in the day. You know, when you could smoke in pubs. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but you know, there was a culture of going to a buskers' night in an old Irish pub, and that's really how we learned. When me and my twin brother's an amazing bass player, and we were in the pubs at 17, playing with all these guys that had were older than us, but were around the 1960s, and so we heard from them about all the stories, and we played one little anecdote. We played with this one drummer once. Me and my twin brother, we were like 17, and we only looked 12, you know, so we looked very young for our age. Now we look older than our age. We were playing with this drummer, and we came off stage. It was a buskers' night, and somebody said, "Do you know who you just played with?" And we said, "No." He said, "This guy called Twink from the Pink Fairies in Hawkwind."
Yes, good Lord.
And fast forward to now, actually, I'm actually, an acquaintance of Twink, and we spoke a couple of months ago. But I remember that right when I was 17, you know, you get these kind of characters from the 60s who probably have been forgotten to some extent, because that music had been forgotten, everybody had moved on. But I was really intrigued at that young age of this kind of 60s music, you know, that came out of Britain, really. And so that's kind of why I started the YouTube channel, really, was to kind of almost, you know, create that sort of all the history from the 60s and 50s as well. From England, from the British, I say England, but the British, you know, there's Rory Gallagher from Ireland, Gary Moore, and just really to put out there the history of that era of the 60s, you know, which I'm fascinated by, you know. But also the 80s.
Live through it.
Didn't live through it, but I was, you know, a very young lad in the 80s, and I love the 80s as well because you had amazing bands like the Police, you know, and Andy Summers. And Andy Summers had shared a flat with Jimi Hendrix in the 60s, sort of recreated himself every decade.
Yeah.
And so it all goes back to the 60s, though, really, I think, in terms of, you know, the 50s with the Shadows, you know, Hank Marvin.
Andy Summers could do some incredible stuff on that Telecaster, which Police in all its entirety was only a 3-piece.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a big Police fan, but Message in a Bottle is just mind blowing.
Yeah. I mean, you know, but Andy Summers he played with I can't remember the name of the keyboard player. The keyboard player was on the Peter Green's last album, End of the Game. I can't remember his name, but anyway, Andy Summers I think he even played in Screaming Lord Sutch band as well.
Yeah, he did. He played Soft Machine and stuff in the late 60s as well. So he's part of the Canterbury scene. Zoot Money.
Zoot Money.
He was a lot older than the other guys, wasn't he?
Yeah. But that's kind of that kind of Andy Summers is kind of like the catalyst of the British music scene, where it really started in the 60s, you know, with Led Zeppelin, but all that history that music faded away towards the late 70s, and you had disco and punk, and then you had new wave, and then along comes Andy Summers again from the 60s, and he brings, you know, things in there, and you know, when punk was totally anti-hippie and anti that, you know, all that
establishment
stuff. Yeah. And here comes a 60s legend, and you know, revitalizes the whole scene again, you know. So
was your musical journey being adhere to the current time, and then you would trace yourself back to find out the roots, or was it a journey of just basically everything?
Really, to be honest, it was my mum's record collection, because me and my brother, we were very lucky. My father was from Argentina, so he would listen to. My father had some really strange tastes. Like, he'd listen to mostly really rough guitar singing from Pampas, which is these guys are called gauchos, and they look after cows and thousands of miles of like empty fields. But you had this style, which is just some guy strumming a guitar and singing. It's quite rough and guttural, and it's quite hard to listen to. And then he'd listen to tango, Carlos Gardel, which is a famous French tango singer, but who resided in Argentina in the 40s and 50s, I think. And then, but we'd have a barbecue every Sunday. We'd have a barbecue, and whenever we had the barbecue, he'd always put on Bob Marley, Legend.
Because Argentina's known for their steaks too, right?
Yeah, asado.
And they love their rugby.
Yeah, I mean, we had the BSB. Do you remember the BSE or BSE scare?
Yeah, BSE, yeah.
My brother used to joke, if anyone's going to get it, we're going to get it, because my dad ate
bovine spongiform encephalitis.
Yeah.
Nobody likes a smart ass, do they?
Yeah, and I'm pretty much a vegetarian now because of the amount of meat I ate when I was a kid, But my mum had this amazing record collection. She had the Rolling Stones, she had B.B. King, the blues, George Benson. So her record collection went from jazz, blues, and everything. And like she'd have, Communique, the album by Dire Straits.
Yeah.
And that was.
Ramon? Did she buy those? Was she a child in the '60s, a teenager in the '60s, and bought them in the '60s?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
She'd seen Canned Heat. She'd gone up to London from Colchester, and she'd gone and seen Canned Heat.
Al Wilson.
Yeah.
Wow.
So she was a proper. She was young in the '60s, but she was a real sort of hippie, and she was obsessed with music. She could play. She can play piano by ear. She's a great singer, and so she really sort of formed our early sort of musical education and influences for sure.
Cool. Mm-hmm. So where did she get it from? Was she just? Is it just part of the times? Just
part of the time. Yeah, '60s was. It was very cultural.
Yeah.
I mean, my mum, she went to a buskers night in a folk club because you used to have folk clubs, and they were very popular with young people. Now sports and whatever is popular now, but back in the '60s, you had a folk club, and people would go there in droves. And in Colchester, there was this one guy. He said, "Can I play?" Okay, he turned up one day, and they said, "No, there's not enough room for you. Sorry, mate." And it was Paul Simon. He'd gone to to play in the folk
that's
club,
right.
and they turned him away. But he had a surrogate mother apparently in Colchester. Paul Simon did.
Well, it's great to have that Argentine background, because Argentine, the flamenco, the Spanish influence, the Cuban influence, the rumba. Our mutual musician friend Otis Rush, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, when Eric Clapton covered "All You Love I Miss Loving," the breakdown is very Cuban.
Yes, it is.
So it all intertwines.
Yeah.
What I like particularly about your a lot of your videos, Ramon, is the seriousness that you have towards the subject. Obviously, you've been studying British blues for a long time, and can you remember the first time when you first heard your first song on the Blues Breakers, or your first Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green? What was it? What was it? A defining point in your life as far as being a musician?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd grown up. I mean, I didn't start playing guitar until I was 17, and my grandmother bought me a guitar and a little PV amplifier. And so before then, I'd been listening to a lot of music and by my mum's record collection, and I knew all the Bob Marley Legend compilation songs, of course. And anyway, I got this guitar, and I thought, right, what am I gonna play on it? So I started to collect Kinks records, because I thought, well, the Kinks, Dave Davis is a great guitar player, but
no.
Yeah, they're easy songs, like Lola and all that stuff. So Thank You for the Days. And so I started learning Kinks songs. Yeah, and I got a Telecaster. My nan bought me this Squire Korean Telecaster, and just bashing out all these Kinks songs, And then my cousin from America came over and said, check these albums out. And Cream, he gave me a Cream album, and then another friend gave me two kind of this was the defining moment. He gave me a cassette, Djangology or something, and he gave me the vinyl version of the Blues Breakers album, and then that was it. I thought, okay, I need to learn everything on this album.
The Blues Breakers, the Beano album.
Yeah. So that's when I kind of went from a rhythm guitar, because I just wanted to be a rhythm guitar player. Because back in those days, in I guess it was the late 80s, early 90s now, 92 maybe. Back in those days, you go to a pub and there'd be two guitar players in every band. One would be just the rhythm guy, and then there'd be the guy that got all the chicks, who would be the lead guitarist. But I thought, I'm going to be happy just to be that rhythm guy, the modest, humble guy. I don't need to be the lead guitarist. My ambition was just to be the rhythm guitar player. And I think that's really helped me now. The fact that I spent like my first 1 or 2 years just playing rhythm, nothing else.
Oh, it's huge. People forget about the Jimi Hendrixes, the Stevie Ray Vaughns. Their contribution not only to guitar, but their foundation was laid on rhythm first.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. It's really good to one of my favorite bands, The Animals. House of the Rising Sun. That's like a rite of passage. You have to learn that song.
A minor.
Yeah, you have to learn House of the Rising Sun when you first start playing guitar, because
I did too.
It's like, I think it's even a 6/8 rhythm. I can't remember what the rhythm is, but.
We started that series about 3 weeks ago. Basically, it's basically a series on R&B bands and their contribution to the English scene and the world scene, with obviously the Animals, the tough English sounding Birmingham's vocalist, but the organ also driving that rhythm too. That's it. Yeah.
Hilton Valentine was the guitar player in the Animals.
Really, and
great name, Hilton Valentine. Yeah.
And Jimi Hendrix's manager, Chas Chandler, the bass player.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Mike Jeffries as well, who managed who ran away with all the Animals' money and then ran away with all Hendrix's money too.
So Ramon,
for him.
when I was a kid growing up, and I was just like my dad gave me. I couldn't read or write, but my dad said. I said to my dad just out of nowhere, "Do you have a Rolling Stones tape or record?" And he said, "I do have one in my drawer." And I couldn't read or write, and I think I picked the wrong tape. And he said, "That's the wrong one." Then he found Get Your Yayas out. And I spoke to Andrew about this before, but was the first thing that attracted you or lured you to that sound do you think it was the sound of the tube or the humbucker or just the soul or the width or what? What drew you in?
I think it was, because my mum, I said to my mum when I was just thinking about getting this guitar, I think so I've probably been about 15, 16. I said to my mum, who's the best guitarist, whoever. And my mum said, I always remember it exactly the moment. She said, well, Jimi Hendrix is the best, but now Eric Clapton is also the best. So that was instilled in me that Jimi Hendrix was the best. And we're talking electric guitar here, obviously, because, there's lots of different types of guitars, but jazz and flamenco and classical, but in terms of sort of rock and blues, Jimi Hendrix was the man. So, but I didn't really, I didn't feel prepared to listen to Jimi Hendrix until I was maybe 18, 19. And then I spent 1 year studying him. I read a book by Charles Shaw Murray. From
the NME, Crosstown Traffic.
Yeah, so I was living with this guy. By that time, I was living in a house share with another chap who used to grow marijuana grass, So for 1 year, and I've only ever done this for 1 year. And then
was he a vegan vegetarian? Where he just focused on greenery? Did he greens?
If he watches this, it's on Facebook. If he watches this, he'll laugh.
One of your 5 a day.
He now resides in Australia. Guy's now in Australia. But he
Andrew, don't play.
Cut long story short,
we can hear it.
Cut long story short, I partook in a bit of herb and read this Charles Shaw Murray book and listened to Jimi Hendrix. Basically, 2 albums I listened to was live, Fleetwood Mac live at the Boston Tea Party, and all. And that's all I listened to for 1 year.
Wow. That version of Jumping at Shadows with that space between the notes and the tone.
Wow.
That's I was fortunate, just like you, to have uncles, my dad, who basically inherited that music from his wife's brothers, my two uncles. And I think my grandfather played piano in silent movies in New Zealand. So I was fortunate to have this catalogue like you. Andrew had the same thing. I'm pretty sure Simon did. And then you realise this is the business. This is the bee's knees. This is where it's really at. And it's a journey, you know.
Yeah, I mean, well,
and I was just like you. I mean, I suffered from Duran Duraniness and policeness, and these throwaway 80s bands, which still relative today are still catchy tunes. But then you realise this is the business, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the Jumping at Shadows guitar solos, you could probably include that in a PhD study of blues, because that is really it just ticks all the boxes. It's a masterclass in how to play blues. Obviously, we've got the masters from Chicago, the Three Kings, Muddy Waters, and
sure,
we've got the Mississippi guys. But if we're talking British blues, that solo is the number one solo. That was it.
Yep.
The stars aligned on that night when he played that guitar solo.
I'm going to ask you guys all a question. We can ask it now, or we can ask it later. But I think I might ask it later because we've still got more stuff to talk about. I've been thinking about it all day.
Okay. We'll see. I'm excited now.
Yeah.
It's a great question, but it'll spoil the show. It'll spoil the show because we've got too much stuff to talk about.
Okay, well, make sure you write the question down then. Don't forget it.
Yeah. So that's great. So basically, obviously, and myself too. I was a Rolling Stones nut, and I used to visit all the record shops in Hamilton. And one guy finally said to me, and I didn't realise this, there was actually a record shop during the day and a knock shop at night. But he basically, he was a pimp, and he basically told me, he said, "Carl, you've got to listen to more music than just the Rolling Stones." So I was a Jimi Hendrix nut for maybe a year or two. Mm-hmm. And then through Jimi Hendrix, then I got into R&B, and then I got into deeper blues, and then I got into soul and jazz. So similar journey, you just discovering the roots. I mean, obviously we start out with the branches, but the ultimate thing is to find the trunk.
Yeah. You go back to the source. I mean, obviously with blues, you can trace the source. From my studies, when I studied music at music college in Colchester.
Can anybody hear me?
And
yeah.
Oh, good. Ramon's frozen.
Oh, have I frozen?
No.
Not with us. He hasn't. No, only with you.
Okay, yes.
Good.
It must be you.
Yes, good. Okay, cool.
So, in terms of the blues, and jazz and, R&B, and you can go back to Mississippi, to the spirituals, the blues and spirituals. And then you can take that further back, when the African slaves were first brought to the southern states in America, and obviously they weren't allowed to have musical instruments. And like in Cuba, you've got the Cuban rhythms, Brazilian rhythms, which were African rhythms. But this is also intertwined with, I don't want to bore you guys with this, but it's quite an interesting thing. Is the European folk music, Irish music, Scottish music, English music, and then you've got the hymns, this whole spiritual thing, which is mixed in with its African rhythm and the African way of doing things.
Yep.
And that's what blues and jazz is.
Yep. People don't realise that New Orleans, which was a big slave quarters, you had obviously a massive French influence. So
Yes.
Jazz came from France.
Yep.
The three main slave destination points were Virginia, Jamaica, Caribbean, and then Brazil. I think Rio de Janeiro. So that's where we got a lot of that music. We'll talk about Ry Cooder a little bit later on. Ry Cooder with what's that amazing album he produced? The Cuban Jazz. Buena Vista Social Club. That's it.
Buena Vista Social Club, yeah.
But that's another discussion altogether. But getting back to the Blues Breakers and the blues,
fast forward.
You're exactly right. and a bit like you, myself, Simon, and Andrew, Eric was this blues nut, and he happened to befriend obviously John Mayall. John Mayall had a beautiful, extensive record collection. Obviously,
that's really where it happened.
Yeah.
I mean. Because Clapton, I mean, he was a competent guitar player in the Yardbirds. Actually, I'm friends with, and I visited his home, and we're going to do a concert together. We jammed together, actually. A guy called Top Topham, who he replaced.
Yep. Top Topham, yeah. Yeah,
because Top Topham left the Yardbirds, and I'm hoping to do a gig pretty soon when this is all coronavirus is over with Top Topham, and it'll be some kind of a nod to that Decca Records,
brilliant.
To that venue. So I want to touch base with Top, and hopefully we can get Twink as well to play drums. So I'm going to talk to those two guys to do this gig. But anyway, that's another story. But to answer your question, Clapton had this time where he was able to. I think he was pretty much living at John Mayall's, and that was his college.
6 months. 6 months.
There you go. So that was his university, was studying those Chicago, we talk about the source, we give credit to Eric Clapton, but really he's just copying the dudes in Chicago, Freddie King, Albert King, B.B. King, they were the guys that kind of, they're the source, they're the essence. And then what Clapton's done, he's put a British spin on it because we're British, cup of tea, all that sort of stuff, and we're going to give our British take on it. For
Pikelets.
Yeah.
Pikelets. Yep.
Yeah.
Pikelets. What's that?
Pikelets. Pikelets is it?
Cleaners. Pipe.
No, pikelets.
Pikelets.
Isn't it English? Is it
it's
English
like a pancake?
English.
Yeah. I know what it is. That's not very English, Carl. That's not very English. Cucumber sandwiches with the crust cut off. That's very English.
On the pavilion.
Scones or scones, depending on your with cram and jam, with jam and cream, even. That's very English.
Yeah, so that's what you're hearing. Yeah, you're hearing post. You're hearing. London was bombed out. Watch the film Get Carter, and that'll explain to you.
Yeah, Michael Caine. Yeah.
London was, it was a bombed out place. It was small. It's not like it is now, and the frame of mind that the people's mentality, really shaped all those bands. They're all kind of like similar. If you see the Rolling Stones, you see Jimmy Page, you see any of these guys, and even Eric Clapton, they're kind of from that era.
Sure.
They have that mentality, that frame of mind, and so that's why the music came out the way it did, because it's delivered.
One thing that we've spoken about regularly on this show, Ramon, is we're fascinated by the determination that these guys had. There's a guy in the chat, Wednesday Store, who alerted me to this type of thinking about 18 months ago. He said to me in a comment that these guys must have been bordering on OCD. Clapton to be sitting there for hours on end playing, same thing with Keith Richards and Jimmy Page. These guys weren't just fiddling around for half an hour or an hour. They were sitting there for hours on end, getting it note for note. So, I've asked Simon this question a few times too. I think it's a British thing.
Never got a satisfactory answer.
No. Well, because I don't think so.
Back in 1962 and 63, you had the coldest winters on record.
Okay, but I still think it's a British thing. I think it's a determination, a determined thing to get something right, and certainly, these guys obviously saw an opportunity in music to make some money, but I think it was more than that too, that they were driven by the love of the blues, that had some power. What do you think about that?
Well, thank you. I think I think as well, I mean, if you go back to that era, obviously there was no YouTube, there was no tuitional books. So the way everybody learned was to slow the record down.
Yeah.
So you had no other alternative. And also the information was very small. Even if you wanted to learn jazz, there was no jazz colleges. There were no jazz colleges. It was all, you'd hear about, I don't want to go off subject here, but if all you had was Charlie Parker's records, and it's like, how do you play like that? Nobody knew. And in fact, one of the reasons Eric Clapton became a heroin addict, he said once in an interview, was because he'd heard that John Coltrane and Charlie Parker were heroin addicts, and he thought that if he took heroin, he'd be able to play music like them.
Yep.
And that was the mentality. There was nobody knew anything unless you actually lived with John Coltrane. You wouldn't know how he played. So I think the only way was to play records. That was the only way. And you didn't have it all.
I was. Right, that's very interesting. I was 14 in 1972, so I'm of the era where you saw bands, you saw the names of bands, but you had no idea what they looked like, no idea what they played. You'd go into a record shop and you would see it, and you would have to make some kind of judgment, mainly on the record cover. Maybe you'd seen a blurred picture in the NME of them, but actually. You didn't know what they were like at all. It was, and I have a famous story. There's a British journalist called David Hepworth. You may have heard of him. He presented the whistle test in the early 80s. But he comes from Yorkshire, and he said that him and his mates, when Bob Dylan first came out, they thought he was called Bob Dylan. Because they never heard anybody say his name. They never heard they never heard it said. So they thought that Dylan was pronounced Dylan. And he said it was like 6 months before they actually heard him on the radio and heard he was actually called Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
So it's a very good example of what we just never had the information then.
And just want to add in here, it was more mysterious. Everything was more mystery around it. Now there is no mystery. So kids that are growing up today, they don't have that enticement that we had when we were growing up. There was a little bit more mystery, I think.
Well, I think you're right, because again, let's use the British blues guys as a very good example of the mystery. One of the guys that played with Clapton in the Roosters, Tom McGuinness, driving on a bus to go to someone's house to hold a record, not to listen to it, but just to hold a record. And Paul McCartney and another one of the Beatles driving on the bus to go and get someone to show them the B7 chord. That's amazing. So can I ask you this question, Ramon? We can jump on the YouTube and I can get a video of a guy showing me the minor and major pentatonic scale. Yeah. So how were these English guys learning major and minor pentatonic scales? Was it? That wasn't me.
There's your answer.
Sorry, is that you, Carl?
No, not at all.
But by listening to the records, do you think? Or Ramon was going around the village showing people how to play major and minor pentatonic scales?
Well, basically, great question, and this comes back to jazz as well. I mean, and it's really funny because jazz and blues, the way everyone learned was by listening to records, and you'd learn how to play a song. Okay, so you work out the scale for the song, or the pattern for the song, or the licks for the song, or the phrases for the song. So when Clapton learned All Your Love, he would have learned the shapes that Otis Rush had used on it, and he'll be playing similar, patterns. And so it's kind of the same in jazz. Jazz and blues would be the same. It would be one of these or one of them. So this song, it's one of them. So I've got to play this scale. And this song is, it's one of them. So they wouldn't say, it's a Mixolydian flat 7. They wouldn't be talking in terms of that. They'd be just saying
no names, is there? No names.
No, it's just one of those songs. So you play this scale. Yes, it's that one.
Do that.
And it's the same.
There's a couple of things. So basically, for example, Stepping Out, which was obviously done by Memphis Slim, which is a jazzy blues shuffle number. Mm-hmm. Eric, at the age of 21, was so clever enough to basically not necessarily reconstruct the song, but he basically
sort of developed.
Yeah. He developed the song around the horn line. So he played the guitar solo was based around the saxophone player.
Yeah,
and he amalgamated Matt Guitar Murphy's guitar licks too. I read a quote a long time ago that, and I don't think I agree with it, but they reckon that Eric Clapton in that 6 months pretty much copied Matt Guitar Murphy's all his licks and basically just plagiarized and copyrighted them. I don't agree with that. I think Eric got his own style through, learning from lots of those guys.
Yeah.
So, but that's just one example. One example.
The thing about learning from records is that you often don't get it right quite. That's like right. Somebody will be actually playing it here, and then you learn it here, and you can't hear sometimes you can hear, but quite often you won't be able to hear. So what in effect happens is that you put your own slant on something. Yeah. Just by dint of the fact you're trying to learn it off a record played at 16 or whatever, to slow it down, so you learn the licks. But if you don't, and because you're doing it by ear, good ear or whatever, but you put naturally your own spin is going to be put upon it because it's not written down because you're using your ear, and therefore you're then going to interpret it. One other thing occurs to me: this business about Eric and his 6 months, hiding in John Mayall's thing. I just thought there was a parallel between him and Robert Johnson, who went away and came back the Wizard of Guitar.
I did the same thing.
He went away and then he came back.
I
wonder if he did the same thing.
I reckon 6 months is the perfect amount of time for anything. Whether you want to lose weight, build muscle, focus on a job, learn guitar, reinvent yourself. Basically, 6 months is a beautiful period. I was watching an Instagram post yesterday, and they said lock yourself in a dungeon, a cage, a bedroom, 6 months. Forget about everything, turn everything off. You'd be amazed what happens in 6 months. For some reason, it's always 6 months. So but you're right. Eric was doing some pretty neat things with the Yardbirds. It was still a bit teeny boppish. You could tell he had some talent. Got to Hurry was okay. A Certain Girl, that guitar solo is mind-blowing. But the maturity that he went from, the transformation from the Yardbirds to the Blues Breakers was like a massive transformation.
Can I ask you a question, Ramon? And that's feeding on to what Carl just said. How important was the gear that Clapton was using when he was a blues breaker? Was that an important ingredient in him developing as a musician as well?
Absolutely. If you listen to his Yardbirds work previously, it was with a Telecaster and a Vox amp, so it's very staccato. The notes didn't really sustain.
Quite bright.
Yeah, and that's great. Yeah, when he went to the Blues Breakers, he had the Les Paul, which is obviously going to sustain. It's a big hunk of wood, and the Marshall amplifier, which he turned up full blast in the pubs and clubs that they were playing, and he had this sustain. What he then developed was this beautiful vibrato that you hear a sax player playing. He turned the guitar into basically a saxophone. One of the reasons we love hearing trumpet and saxophone is because they have a long note which sustains, and you can add vibrato. It sounds like a human voice, and a violin as well. And that's what he basically turned the guitar into, one of those instruments. But obviously the technology had evolved with a Marshall amplifier, which he was pushed beyond its recommended usage. Obviously, he went into to sustain, and really he created the sound. But you could say that he was trying to replicate some stuff that Freddie King was doing, because if you listen to some Freddie King records of that period, obviously before, you can hear that he was playing a gold top with P90s, but it was going into distortion. So sure. He probably listened to that album and thought, okay, wait a minute, Freddie King's onto something. It wasn't fully developed, but you could see that here the nucleus of the idea. And then I think Clapton really pushed that to the extreme, developed a beautiful style. And then you've got this beautiful, long, sustained vibrato notes. He's playing a very light gauge, of course, but he had this very fluid, very, very fluid style. And he was really
he bouncing? Was he bouncing these ideas off with anybody? Now, the reason why I'm asking that, Ramon, is because, you know, if I'm going to do something or if I'm going to buy something or I'm always going to ask your opinion or Carl's opinion or Simon's opinion. Was Eric bouncing ideas off anybody in your research that you know of?
I think it was really just John Mayall. John
Okay.
Mayall, you know, he was older. I think he was 32 at the time or 33 maybe. And he was kind of like a father figure to Eric. And so obviously, you know, he's playing in the band. You know, in those days, you go to can you imagine back in the 1960s in a London club when he probably first got his Marshall, you know, he was trying to get over Huey Flint's drums and he was pushing the amp. And you can imagine the night when it happened and it was like, oh, wow, it does this. The Vox didn't do that, but this does.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my sound. And then the next night, you know, there would have been a defining moment. He would have pushed the amplifier, you know, and it probably very crowded. People were talking. They were trying to get above the din, and that's, you know, there would have been an epiphany one night when that happened.
Yeah.
Can I give some credit where credit should be due?
Absolutely.
You sure?
Oh,
Okay, so Eric was obviously involved with John Mayall. The Rolling Stones obviously involved with Ian Stewart. Chuck Berry is obviously involved with Johnny Johnson. As a kid growing up, you mentioned private schools. I was fortunate at Marist Brothers, a Catholic school, to have free music lessons. Most music teachers have a piano background.
Yeah.
So I imagine John Mayall, Johnny Johnson, Ian Stewart would have helped these guitar players along with keys, progressions, major, minor. George Martin with the Beatles. Is that a valid point?
I think very much so. Yeah, everybody has a mentor. You know, you might have several mentors. You know, I have a lot of mentors in my life, and I think everyone should. If you do not have a mentor, you should have one. And I think, you know, John Mayall obviously, you know, was a source for Eric Clapton. You know, that record collection was his university. You know, that was his graduation. And if you don't have somebody to show you, especially back in those days where we didn't have the internet, you know, if you don't have somebody to show you this information, I mean, like, I've got a good friend, Tim, who I sometimes do some teaching work with. He's my boss. And, you know, a lot of the times I'd learned myself to play acoustic guitar, and I'd learned a lot of Blind Blake and Blind Boy Fuller, you know, and again, I'd never seen them play. So I didn't know how the right hand was. I didn't know where to put my right hand. And Tim's an amazing classical guitar player. And he said, no, just raise it. I don't know if you can see it. Just raise it like this. You know, I had it like this, straight on.
Hold on, what present you?
You know, so this is how I was playing all the sort of the ragtime. If I was, you know. You know, so on and so forth. And he was, no, that's not how you play classical guitar. And he brought my hand up here, you know, and so this is, you know, gave me a lesson, you know, classical guitar. You know, so you can kind of see just my friend telling me to do that. It saved me years of incorrect technique, you know, and you need people to
a little bit like Sunhouse telling Robert Johnson, you know, certain keys, certain approaches.
Absolutely, yeah. So you need to have you need to have confidence, but not an ego where you're closed to somebody showing you how to do it properly. You know, you shouldn't have the attitude, oh, I know how to do it, I'm going to do it my way. No, I think
and what you played just then, which is why I believe that music's colorblind. That sounds like ragtime, which would be very much Scotch, Irish, Celtic, Appalachian Mountains fiddle stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you know, the rhythm there, the 1-2 Scott Joplin rhythm, again, I think originates in Africa. I think it's an African rhythm.
Okay.
You know, if I could be so bold there. But like you say, the harmony is definitely European. So I think what these styles, jazz and blues, I would say they really originate. Without Africa, they wouldn't have come. There wouldn't be those styles without Africa. But it's a catalyst, and the mix African and Europe. Africa and Europe met in Mississippi and in Cuba and in Brazil.
And that's why Mick and Keith, when Keith put that drop the needle on that 45 Johnny Be Good, he said, "Listen, I don't want to be a bricklayer, a plumber, a builder. This is what I want to do." And his world changed.
Yes, yeah, that's it. You have that moment, but I think as well, a guy that is really not mentioned in if we're talking guitar here. And this is kind of where everybody forgets this guy, and nobody ever mentions him because the focus is on the blues and the Chicago guys and whatnot, Robert Johnson. But Hank Marvin really is the secret of the British blues guitar players.
I watched one of your videos, and you mentioned that you said that's because the British guys got the melody from Hank Marvin, and you had me thinking you've hit the nail on the head. The melody.
I'm going to put my hand up because I think I know a lot, but I don't. Please.
You look like you know that.
No, I don't. Please explain because I love surf guitar.
Yeah, explain.
Well, just as Andrew just stated there, Hank Marvin's whole game was melody. It was about playing a melody, whether it would be a surf doo-wop thing or a classical melody. With the Shadows, his whole game was, getting a beautiful vibrato and a beautiful tone, and with the delay and and playing a beautiful melody. So Peter Green and Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, they would have picked up on that. Okay, we need to play melodic guitar. So when they played the blues, even listen to Eric Clapton on any of that Blues Brothers album, and he's playing melodies.
Oh, beautiful. Was Hank Marvin influenced by Buddy Holly and Dick Dale? And Rick Ray,
you know what?
Or did he had his own sound?
I think it was obviously it was an amalgamation of different sounds, and I'm actually going to do I'm doing a couple of videos on him very soon, awesome. Hank Marvin, and my mum keeps saying you want to do a video on Hank Marvin, wow. So I shall reveal it all. I really want to
because he came across a bit like Buddy Holly, very clean cut. Very professional. Your mother would love him. Your girlfriend would love him. The neighbor would love him, and the priest would, just everybody.
Yeah, so maybe Simon can tell me this, or any of you guys can tell me. I think it was Jet Harris. Was he in the band? A guy called Jet Harris.
Yeah, Jet Harris. Yeah. He's in the Shadows.
He was really rock and roll. He was like nutter. He was like the Sid Vicious of. So they weren't all clean cut. There were some rebels. Okay. But they used to back up, obviously, Cliff Richards, who was like an English.
The thing about Hank is that he's not seen as particularly as a blues player, is he? Yeah. He's not. He's a bit more kind of. To me, he's a bit more like, he's got that kind of Wes Montgomery kind of. What's he called? Chet Atkins type thing, isn't he? He's got that kind of clean Chet Atkinsy kind of playing. More than he has that kind of
which would influence George Harrison.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Hank Marvin's biggest influence is Django Reinhardt.
The three-fingered Frenchman, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Two fingers.
Two and a half fingers, yeah. Burnt off.
I have about 3 or 4 Django albums. I still haven't really knuckled down and played them in its entirety, but you talk about swing, and we talk about. I mean, the Rolling Stones' unsung heroes was not Mick, not Keith, not Brian, was Bill and Charlie. Swing is everything.
Mm-hmm.
The roll, not just the rock.
Yeah, the one thing also is I was big into the Ventures. Was the Ventures predated Hank Marvin, or they were at the same time?
Good question. I mean, Hank Marvin.
After.
He went right back to. I mean, the Beatles, probably pre-Beatles. So we're talking probably late 50s.
Well, he's the 50s, aren't they? Late 50s. Hank Marvin is, in the with the Shadows, it's late 50s. It's not early 60s.
Yeah.
So I would say that he predates. I mean, really, all the Stones and the Beatles and everyone else. He's in that 50s rock and roll thing, that first, post Elvis, with Cliff.
Yes.
After all, let's have a look. See, the Ventures were formed in 1958 in Tacoma in Washington. So
there you go.
So
I mean,
same sort of time.
It's very important. If you want to know about Jimmy Page, you want to know about Jeff Beck and all those guys, and Peter Green, Eric Clapton. You have to, if you really want to play like them, learn your. Well, look at Albatross. Albatross was
Sleepwalk, Johnny Farina.
Yeah,
that was Sleepwalk.
Sleepwalk. Santo and Johnny. You have to learn. Those tunes. If you want to play. If you want to play like Jimmy Page, learn Link Ray, and learn a bit of punk and learn a bit
Rumble.
of
Yeah.
Jimmy Page was kind of very edgy punk. He was like rough rock and roll. Cliff Gallup and all those kind of guys.
Galloping Cliff Gallup. Yes.
Yeah. So my theory was like, if you want to sound like Clapton, listen to what Clapton listened to.
Sure.
Rather than just copy Clapton. Obviously that as well. Try and find out what he's.
Arvin's in the chat. He's asking you that. He's asking the question about Hank Marvin had a thing of his guitar being out front, and maybe that appealed to the blues players. What do you think about that, Ramon?
Sorry, could you ask that question again? Sorry.
So Hank Marvin had the thing of his guitar being out in front. Maybe that appealed to the blues players.
Yeah, I think with Clapton, I think he was on a different tree. So he would have, Freddie King was, the vocal and then the guitar answering the vocal. I think, and the guitar. I think that was more Eric Clapton's thing. But just the fact that there was this guy called Hank Marvin in England making the guitar sing and playing beautiful melodies, that was enough for the British guitarists to say, look, okay, we need to up our game. We can't just whittle and play, pentatonic meanderings. We need to actually play some melodic things,
Yeah, completely. I think that's right. Yeah, I think you can't underestimate the influence of Hank Marvin to the rest of the British blues rock scene. The whole whole history of it. He was the first guitar hero from the UK. And he was in the 50s and not in the 60s. And Page, Beck, Clapton, they all would have had some influence from Hank. Maybe not necessarily so overt, but and not the only influence, but
Yeah, it's like a lot of people who listen to Motorhead, for example, are metalers, or heavy rockers, and they don't realise that Lemmy only listens to one band, and that's the Beatles. That's all he listens to.
Yeah.
He doesn't like any other band. He only likes the Beatles. But he creates this Motorhead, really heavy, hard rocking music. But he himself, he's only obsessed with the Beatles. That's
of course, Ozzy Osbourne as well. Ozzy Osbourne's a massive Beatles fan. Loves the Beatles. So
it's interesting to know what their. It's always good to, if you're checking out a player, you want to know what their influences are, and know what their mindset, what are they thinking, not just what they're playing. How are they thinking?
Yeah. Oh, completely. Yeah, and I think, and we've discussed it on these shows that the thing about that the British blues scene, Clapton, Beck, Page, they came out of that London blues tradition, which came out of skiffle, which came out of jazz, and was curated by people like Chris Barber, and they were older and serious about it. A bit like sort of you were talking about earlier about English folk, whereas other people, the rock and roll thing, not quite so serious, not quite so curated. John Mayall was older and they had that record collection and therefore was curating, a seriousness that Eric bought into, that blues seriousness.
Yes.
To be, great players.
Well, you had this other kind of movement as well in Britain in the 60s with Cyril Davis, Alexis Cornet.
Yeah, Alexis Cornet, yeah.
And who invited John Mayall to London in the first place. And then you had an incredible guitar player by the name of, I always forget his name, but he did he invented the Dagad tuning and did an instrumental called Angie.
Bert Jansch,
No,
David Graham.
David Graham. So David Graham, yeah, he'd gone to Morocco, and because there's a little theory I've got. With America, you've got Cuba, and a lot of the Cuban rhythms in the 50s went to America. And if you listen to Chuck Berry's drummer, and a lot of those rock and roll drumming, it has a big Cuban influence, to it. Just a feel of that early rock and roll rhythm. There is a Cuban influence there somewhere. And for us here in England, if you talk in terms of Led Zeppelin and those bands and the Rolling Stones, a lot of the catalyst for us geographically is Morocco. Whereas a lot of those bands went to Morocco and drew influences from Morocco. And David Graham was obviously one of them. And he invented this tuning called Dadgad on the guitar. And he brought this whole kind of world music sensibility to London before it was called world music, and Brian Jones was also.
Brian Jones was in that, isn't he? And Jimmy Page is always interesting. And the Stones went to Morocco, didn't they? Stuff. It's very interesting. Yeah.
And they all got that from David Graham. David Graham was the first guy, and he got it from his teacher, and his teacher was based, I think, in Tunisia or Syria or some, and so it kind of there's another lineage there as well with these English folk guitarists, and Scottish.
Yeah.
Bert Young's is Scottish, I think. I'm not sure.
Bert Young's is Scottish. Yeah.
So, there's lots of different strands, and they kind of all meet in London in the 1960s, and that's how you got this incredible, array of, bands and music.
Yeah. But using blues as an influence. I mean, Bert Young and David, they used blues as an influence, didn't they? They kind of, so it was in there together with the folk thing.
And jazz as well, jazz, blues, and, I think even David Graham
jazz, certainly.
Jazz and blues or something,
Yeah.
Can I ask you a couple of questions, Ramon? In the chat, Dave, he's a Stones nut. He loves the early Stones. He's asking you your opinion on a couple of things. So he's saying Brian Jones is his favourite Rolling Stone, but he's a little bit sad that he gets wiped out of some of the recent history by the Rolling Stones. Do you have an opinion on that? And what do you also do you think that Brian Jones showed the open tuning to Keith Richards? Paul Trinker lays a good argument for that in his book. Do you have an opinion on that too?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, the reason why the Rolling Stones, they really feel that they're another band. There's kind of two eras of the Rolling Stones, obviously Brian Jones and then everything that happened after him. And Brian Jones was the manager. He was getting a bigger cut of the money when they first started.
Ripping them off. It didn't work well.
So there was an animosity towards him. And then Andrew Oldham told Mick Jagger and Keith Richards they ought to start writing songs together because the Beatles had been doing the same thing with Lennon and McCartney. And then there was a downfall, obviously, of Brian Jones because, he wasn't really together enough to get his own songs written. But you see, the genius of Brian Jones was that, he was, the Beatles had Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney was the genius in the studio, along with, obviously George Martin was the guy that arranged it, all the classical musicians. But Paul McCartney was really the arranger of the Beatles. He was the interface between George Martin and the rest of the guys. And Brian Jones was really the genius of the Rolling Stones in the studio. And, if you listen to any like Ruby Tuesday, the recorder, Brian Jones played that recorder part, which is a beautiful, beautiful recorder part. And it makes the song. Without that recorder part, the song is dead, and he did that on every song, from Page to Black.
Did all of those bands have kind of multi-instrumentalist? Because that strikes me. John Paul Jones is the multi-instrumentalist in Led Zeppelin. Brian Jones is the multi-instrumentalist of the Stones. And all those guys, they seem to be able to play more than one instrument.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because, Paul McCartney would be that guy in the Beatles, and Sting would be that guy in Police, actually, because Sting plays about 20 instruments,
Does he? Yeah.
Yeah, but so it does help. I mean, it does really, really help. If you're from a production point of view, it's going to save you getting session musicians and you've just got a wider. Your mentality is wider because the problem with blues guitar players, for example, I know a lot of blues players that just think Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan is blues and nothing else is, and that's all they play. They're playing narrow bandwidth of Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix, and without realizing that Jimi Hendrix had a massive bandwidth. Stevie Ray Vaughan had a massive, Stevie Ray Vaughan was a great jazz guitar player, could play jazz really well. Yeah. He was a massive Johnny Guitar Watson fan, and a lot of these guys that just stick to Stevie Ray Vaughan, they don't know about Johnny Guitar Watson. They don't know about, the jazz players. So I think that mentality with Brian Jones, bringing in all these different influences, Indian influences, and not forgetting that Brian Jones went to Morocco to an area near Tangier and recorded for EMI a world music album. It was just these local musicians playing these pipes. EMI put it out in the late 60s or early 70s, I think. So, he just had a really, very creative mind. And the Rolling Stones lost that. Okay, they've got a great blues guitarist in Mick Taylor. But he's not a producer. He's not the same as Brian Jones.
Just a player.
Yeah. So really,
And
became a bit of they became a rock and roll band. They became a parody almost of themselves. But with Brian Jones, they were artistic. There was something else there. There was something special. So
that's pretty interesting, yeah.
So to answer your second question, did Brian Jones show Keith Richards? Yes. And Keith Richards has got something against Brian Jones because he doesn't want to acknowledge that Brian Jones taught Keith Richards how to play guitar, basically.
Yep.
Secondly, so Keith Richards comes up with the story that he learned it off Raikuda during the recording of the Performance soundtrack,
That's correct.
And but he would have been exposed to all those slides from Brian Jones right at the early inception of the Rolling Stones. He just doesn't want to name check Brian Jones for whatever reason he's got. I don't know why, but there is a bit of Keith Richards. He doesn't feel. I think there's obviously some animosity there and reluctance to admit how great Brian Jones was in terms of the history of the band.
So just to sort of deviate a little bit away from talking about guitar players and blues, I'm obviously a big fan of your channel. Your channel is outstanding. The subjects of your videos, the depth and the research that you go into, whether it's Stevie Ray Vaughan, the Beatles, effects, it's phenomenal. And you deserve all the credit you get for it, because obviously from being a guitar player, we're seeing a labor of love. So how long does it take you to do these videos? Obviously you do a lot of research, you're meticulous on your research, but what I also like about you too, also Ramon, is that you're very humble. You acknowledge people who leave comments, and we talk about this a little bit because we believe that musicians and social media have a responsibility to use social media respectfully, but what's interesting is you get a few dickheads that leave comments, and I like your replies normally. You're pretty positive with your replies. But you able to sort of give us a bit of an idea on how you plan these videos?
Oh, certainly, yeah. I mean, thank you very much. I'm honoured to be here about it. I think the way it works for me, I mean, everybody's got a different way of doing things. So maybe some channels, the way they do it is they research over a period of 2 or 3, 4 weeks. I don't tend to do that. I'll have an idea up front of what I want to do, and then I'll set aside 2 days of really intense research, like literally from the morning until the night, because I think you need to live in that zone. Your brain has to be 100% focused on that period, because if I'm spread the research over too long a time, then you start forgetting things, and you forget. What I want to do is find something and then I print it. Find something and then I print it. That's the way I work, and then I can move everything around in the Pro Tools computer thing that I use. So it's coherent into. So I literally, but what happens is you go down a rabbit hole, because you might find you might want to prove a point, or you might want to find, maybe you discover something new. So all of my videos, I try to find at least one thing that you've never heard of before, that nobody's put out there.
Yeah.
But it could be, I'll give you an example. So I'm a big Richie Valens fan, who did this tune.
La Bamba. Yeah.
So he played a white guitar, and if you look at the film La Bamba, he's playing a white, not him, but the actor Louis Diamond Phillips is playing this white guitar, acoustic guitar.
Yes.
Nobody knew what that guitar was. Like, even in the film, they had to make a copy of it because nobody knew what it was. There's only some grainy photos, and I discovered that it was an Epiphone guitar, and then I found the model and everything. So that was kind of the discovery. But it's quite funny because I actually interviewed somebody who's a really great guy, who in America has written a book about. He'd written a book just as I released that video. He'd written a book and released it.
That's correct.
A month afterwards. And funnily enough, he'd also discovered that it was an Epiphone. So it was great to interview him. I mean, he'd obviously done a hell of a lot more research than I had. But he contacted me, or I contacted him. I can't remember who, but it was great that video had introduced me to that guy, and he came on and gave a great, so that's the kind of beauty of the channel, is that you find experts in that field who can come and contribute and fill in the gaps. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because
I didn't realise that Carol Kay played on La Bamba, on Richie Valens' La Bamba.
Yeah.
Acoustic guitar. Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, there was 3 guitar players on the 3 musicians, including Richie Valens.
Yeah.
I'm
the great
sorry.
Earl Palmer on drums. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I missed about 5 minutes. But did you say that Brian Jones? Keith won't admit it, but Brian Jones taught Keith open G tuning. Is it your?
My personal opinion, I would say yes.
Yeah.
Because
there's a Spotify video, not Spotify, live in Ireland, and the band's running hot. They're absolutely running hot. 1965. They do things like Everybody Needs Somebody to Love, Off the Hook, Down the Road a Piece. They do Route 66, and there's a small little ad-lib between Route 66 and Little Red Rooster where Charlie Watts comes and says, just like in just one of our favourite numbers, and you can hear Brian Jones down tuning or tuning to the slide tuning. So there was something going on. Something going on where Brian knew stuff that Keith didn't, and obviously Keith learnt later, but was too proud to say that Brian may have taught him.
Oh, no, there's a fact that Brian did actually teach Keith how to play, because there's a few anecdotes of one of their girlfriends who said, I remember seeing Keith Richards sitting on the floor, starry-eyed at Brian Jones teaching him how to play chords, because, Keith came into the Rolling Stones, pretty... basic guitar player, and whereas Brian Jones was a fully formed blues musician, and Brian Jones knew open tuning. I mean, he played in D major for sure, D major tuning, and he knew the Delta tunings, and he was a very studious young fellow at the time. Whereas Keith Richards was not in the same league, and was always in his shadow. So I think that's probably why now he wants to claim his own great status.
There's another thing too, Ramon. He worked out cross harp. Brian Jones worked out cross harp, and this was all before YouTube. He was the first British guy that I've read to play open tunings and play slide guitar. No one in Britain. You might be able to correct me, but no one in Britain was doing that. He'd worked that all out.
Absolutely. And this is coming back to Eric Clapton as well. A lot of maybe young women and men nowadays, they think, well, why is Eric Clapton? Anyone can do that. Well, nobody did it before them in England.
Yeah.
Now they can. Yes.
Anyone can do it now. You go to YouTube, you're going to get a lesson on it. But then, no, there was no books, no videos. There was nothing. There was just records from Chicago and Mississippi. That was it.
Story. Sorry.
I was going to say, sorry, Carl, I was just going to say that Davy Graham wrote his famous song Angie, which is in Diagon in 1962, when he was 19. So it was out very early, you know. So obviously other guys knew about alternative tunings. I would guess by, you know, which Brian would have picked up on, I'm sure.
Yeah, everybody copied David Graham.
Everyone else, yes. Yeah.
There were two guitar players.
Jimmy Page, of course.
Yeah, if you want to play electric, you copy Hank Marvin. If you want to play acoustic, you copy David Graham. That was the 60s.
Yeah. You know. But I think, yes, I mean, as he was doing that in 1962, that's very early. You know, the Stones hadn't really got going in 62 much. So, you know, he would have been influencing all those people, wouldn't he?
David Graham is so sad because he ended up playing in Soho in London in a Chinese takeaway and for next to no money. Whereas all the guys that had stolen his ideas were touring around doing stadiums.
Yeah, living in mansions.
Exactly. So
ain't that ever the case?
Did you guys ever read that story where I think Eric hadn't joined the Yardbirds? He knew of the inner circle, the blues circle of Georgia Gominski, the Marquis, and he didn't know much about guitar. And he would show up drunk and sing Little Queenie, and then people knew him. And then 6 months later, everyone's jaws dropped because he could play guitar like no one else. Did you guys ever read that story?
Who's this, Carl? Who's that?
Eric Clapton. It's a true story. Yeah, he would show up and sing Little Queenie. So he was a music lover, but he hadn't quite mastered the guitar yet. That's a really early story about Eric Clapton. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, when he was playing the harmony, I think he had a harmony, quite a beautiful looking harmony guitar.
Yeah.
Or his aunt, not his grandmother. I guess it would be.
Wow.
Yeah.
I also wrote some notes because, I mean, obviously 2-3 hours could go by. And we've obviously talked about Eric Clapton, Blues Breaker, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about Peter Green. But there's a really good series that came out late 60s, 1970, maybe 71. If you wanted to learn about the early Eric Clapton and didn't have much money, there was a Decca released a compilation, The World of John Mayall, which had some isolated gems of Eric Clapton. And there's another great album where Eric's got a beard. He's obviously under the influence of heroin. He's playing Les Paul, and it's called the World of Eric Clapton and John Mayall. Right. People don't realize that Eric Clapton did session work at the age of 21 with no other than Otis Spann and champion Jack Dupree.
That's right.
Unbelievable.
Yep, and they were on Decca, weren't they? Those.
Correct. So people,
Blues Breakers album.
So people talk about the Blues Breaker album, Yardbirds. They don't realize he did a little bit of session work with these blues giants.
Yes, yeah, he did.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean because in the documentary I just made on the it's really funny because I made a documentary on the Beano album.
Yeah, we've studied it.
And then 3 days later, another sort of well-known guitar YouTuber released his documentary.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah, 5 Watt World.
Yeah, and it is, for me, it's
Keith Williams. Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting because he's obviously. I said to him I left a comment and I said, look, well done. We've filled in some gaps that maybe we both left.
Yeah, and you were very good about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always it's bound to happen sooner or later, and but it's he's very professional. His video production is fantastic, and he's very, very good. I love his presentation. It's very, very, very good. And it's nice that that we are now we're now discovering. On one side you've lost the mystery, you've lost the discovery that with these documentaries you're losing the mystery aspect to it. But on the other side, you're getting all this incredible information, that wasn't out there before in the public domain.
Yeah, but that's what we want, though, Ramon, because we're, for lack of a better word, we're the nerds. We're the people. We're the guys that want to know what valves were used in that amp, and was that JT40?
KT88s.
Yeah, and that quads amp that he was using before he went to the 212. You know, you pointed that out, and Carl highlighted that to me as well. I wasn't aware of that. Most people think that Clapton went straight to that 212s. You know, a lot of people don't realise that he was using 410s.
Well, I may have actually played that very 410 Marshall. I think I was at the Kempton Guitar Show 2 years ago, and there was a guy who had a lot of old Marshalls, and he had one of those 4x10 amplifiers from 66, 65. And he said that this was the one that Clapton had. He had it for a few gigs, and he'd use it in the pub, and he didn't like it.
Wow.
And it was interesting. I played through it, and it had a really rubbish clean sound, but the overdrive sound was the Blues Breakers tone. It's exactly the same. You know, and you could get it quite easily. It wasn't. You didn't have to turn it up too high, and it went into that distortion. You know.
With everything said and done, once Eric found that JTM 45 with the 212, and Jim Marshall said, "Here it is," and it fitted into the boot of his car, and he obviously paid off the layaway balance, and everybody was happy. Was he happy? Was there a sweet spot? Was he happy overall with the final production? Eric?
Yeah, I think so.
Forget about Mike Vernon. Forget about Gus Junjin or John Mayer. Forget about those guys. Was Eric happy with the end result?
Yeah, this is one thing where that YouTuber 5 Watt World and I differ, because he says they were using 25 watt Celestians, and I disagree. I think they were using essentially what were.
Oh, we've lost him. No, he's back. Hold on.
He's coming back.
Like I was saying, I think 5 Watt World, I think he said they were using 25 watt greenbacks, and I disagree with that. I'm pretty sure, 99.9% sure that in that Blues Breaker amp were 15 watt Celestian Blues, basically, but they didn't have the covers. So there were 2 15 watt speakers, you know, and that explains a lot of the guitar distortion, you see, which you're not going to get 25 watt.
Very good point. So is that something that Marshall himself worked out, or was that something that Clapton would have organised with him? Do you think?
The speakers?
Yeah.
No, it would have all been Jim Marshall. Clapton didn't know anything. All he knew was that he could plug his Les Paul with a curly lead into an amplifier and get it. Up. That's all Clapton knew at the time. Marshall would have said, "Here, take this one," which was a 4x10, and then obviously he didn't like that one, or it was too big, so he then gave him the 2x12, which he'd been more familiar with because it had the same speakers as his AC30, so that's really essentially what it was. And you know, Clapton, he didn't care what he was plugging into, as long as it worked and he could get a great sound. That's all he cared about. You know, he wouldn't have gone into the details. It wouldn't have meant anything to him. You know.
Okay, I'm going to have to go back and revisit that point on your video, Ramon, because I did not pay attention to that. But that's going to be a defining point with debates between Clapton nuts in the future. And it's this archaeology which is important, you know. And no disrespect to 5 Watt World, but you know, you're in London. You're a Brit. I'm sure your research is just a little bit more in depth.
Well, you know, you have to have an open mind about these things, because you know Joe Bonamassa was absolutely certain. Because I was talking to Kirk Fletcher, who's an amazing blues guitarist, American blues guitarist, amazing. You know, if you don't know Kirk Fletcher, check him out. He's really a great player.
Yeah.
We were talking the other day, and he was telling me that because he'd worked previously with Joe Bonamassa in his band playing guitar. And he was saying that Joe Bonamassa had said he owned a Marshall Blues Breaker type amp. He was sure it was a 20 watt amp and not, you know, the louder amp. And but I've researched that, and there's an amazing article in Guitar Magazine where they really went into all this history of that amplifier, and I'd recommend anybody to read that article. It's called Guitar Magazine. It's a UK publication, and I'm sure you can get it in Australia and USA. For me, he's done the defining research.
Did Peter Green take that amp or a similar amp into the Hard Road recording session?
Good question.
Oh, good question. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Eric Clapton went to Greece, didn't he? and
lost it,
and lost an amplifier there. Now, the amplifier that he took to Greece, my question to everyone is, what was the amplifier? There's some photos, some grainy photos of a Marshall head on a cabinet. But was that the bass player's amp, or was that Eric Clapton's? That's my question to everyone. Did he take the Bluesbreaker amplifier?
Wasn't that John McVie's amp? Didn't he? Wasn't that his amp? Not.
I think it was, yeah. So I think, sorry. So
I thought Peter Green used Fender Dual Showmans, didn't he? That was pretty much his thing.
No,
There's been a bit of muttering about Orange, possibly.
Yeah, I've done a whole video on Peter Green's gear, and he started off with Selma, playing bass through a Selma True Voice. Then he,
right, yeah.
In the Bluesbreaker, he had a Marshall Bluesbreaker. Marshall JTM 45, and then after that he went to Mantamp, and then obviously Orange. And the only reason they used Orange was because they had a deal and they got them free. But they didn't really like them. That's the truth of the matter. Orange will never tell you this. So apologies to Orange, who are actually in Borehamwood, this very town that I live in. But the fact remains, the only reason they used Orange was because they got them for free.
Oh, free.
And they actually didn't actually like the amps. All they wanted was Fender amps.
Yep. Did not know that.
Yeah.
All right.
Although, Orange capitalized on the fact that Peter Green used their amps, but he didn't like them.
I'm going to ask everybody a question right now. I'll start with Simon first, Andrew second, and then obviously Ramon last, and I'll give you my answer. Meet Giblets will give his own answer. Okay, so the scenario, I'm an artist. I like to paint pictures with words. It's Friday night. You've worked all week. There's 2 shows to go to. You got your best buddy with you. You worked all week. You're excited. You got your paycheck. A couple of cold beers are waiting. It turns out that Eric Clapton and the Bluesbreakers are at the Flamingo at 9:00, and then obviously your other favourite band's Peter Green at the height of his powers down at Kluke's Cleek at 9:15. You can only see one show. Both these people are in the height of their powers. Simon, who do you pick? Simon, who do you pick?
See, see, Clapton or Green? Which one? Right, okay, so I've seen Eric Clapton a few times. I've not seen Peter Green, so I'm going Peter Green.
Okay. Height of their powers. They've got the Les Pauls. They have obviously their Marshalls, tube amps. Yeah. They're wailing away. They're just, there's nothing that can touch them. Eric's fresh off the Beano album. Peter Green's brand new into the hard road. They're both hot. People are talking about them. Andrew, who do you pick?
Eric Clapton by a nose.
I've thought about this. I've thought about this long and hard, but Peter Green just has that sweeter note. Sorry,
don't be sorry. Don't be sorry.
They're both gods in the realm of in the realm of a human form, not a spiritual form. But no, seriously. But Ramon, who do you pick?
Well, let me be diplomatic about this. If it was 1966, I would go and see Clapton. If it was 1968, I'd go and see Peter Green.
But that answer's wrong. That answer is wrong because I thought about it. Because in 68, you had the added bonus of Danny Kerwin and Jeremy Spencer.
Exactly. I think Peter Green in Bluesbreaker was. I mean, I don't want to. Eric Clapton in '66 was on fire. He was an angry man. He was possessed. He had a lot of anger in him, and it came out.
Double Crossing Time's one of the greatest guitar solos of all time.
Yeah, Peter Green was great. He was knocking about London, the blues scene. He was coming on board. He had a very sweet tone, as you said. But really, the magic came a little bit later, maybe a year later, and that's when Peter Green was. The Peter Green we know and love now. Although his work with the Bluesbreakers was outstanding, I feel that his peak was a little bit later, maybe 1 or 2 years later.
Yeah.
And that's where you really wanted to, like the Boston Tea Party was the peak. That was where
Yeah.
you
Because I love the Beano album. I can't deny the fact that Eric was basically, I wouldn't say the godfather, the guy that kicked the doors in, basically the guy that set the stage, had the balls, had the nous to talk to Mike Vernon. And I think one of the unsung heroes is Mike Vernon, because there's that famous album, Fleetwood Mac at Chicago.
Absolutely.
And this is the next question. And Mike Vernon, I don't think would have much favoritism, but he seemed to have quite a soft spot for Peter Green, didn't he?
Yeah,
Yes.
I talked when I was making the documentary. I actually spoke to Mike Vernon just before I did it, and I asked him, does he want to take part in the documentary?
Wow.
And he's in Spain at the moment, and Spain just had gone into lockdown at that time, and he politely said no, thank you. But we talked about some of the engineers involved in Decca at that time, and I think he was impressed that I knew the name of an engineer, and so he he was cordial to me, and he was really, really nice guy. And I think for him, that whole, what you got to remember is that it's for him, he was producing lots of albums. He produced David Bowie's first album,
Wow.
first ever album. So that was, the whole British blues thing for him was important for him because he loves it and it's dear to his heart. But it was a footnote in his career, and it's probably the one that he's been asked the most about. So he probably hears that question so many times that when I finally came, the guy's, I don't know, he's 79, I think. I think he's 79. Is he 69 or something? I can't remember his age, but he just wants to chill out. He doesn't want to keep answering the same question over and over again. And I came in and I said, can you tell me about the Blues Breaker album with Eric Clapton? He was like, thank you, but no thanks.
Have you been approached by, I can't pronounce his name, he's the guy that did a book on the British blues. I think he's a Swedish British blues expert. He's writing a biography at the moment on Peter Green. Right. Has he approached you for any opinions or any of your insights on his book at all, Ramon?
No, not at all. No. But I would be happy to talk to him. But let me tell you, I met Peter Green 20 years ago in Denmark Street. And Denmark Street in London is where all the guitar shops are. It's just off Charing Cross Road. And so I was in this guitar shop called Vintage and Rare. And they said Peter Green had just been in here. So I rushed out. I was with my then girlfriend at the time. Rushed out the shop and I saw this sort of people carrier with somebody driving it. And I stopped the car. I actually walked in front of the car. I was, in my early 20s at the time. And he very graciously came out. And I spoke to him for 30 minutes on the street.
Wow.
Girlfriend, And that was when not long after I discovered his music, maybe 4 or 5 years. And he was my god then. He was the legend. That's how I learned to play guitar, was from Peter Green, not from Eric Clapton. I'm much more of a Peter Green style player than an Eric Clapton style player.
Yes, that's very clear.
And so to meet the man, and he wasn't this cocky guy that was in Fleetwood Mac. He was very quiet, very softly spoken, humble guy. But I actually met my hero. They say you should never meet your heroes.
But you were glad that you did.
I looked on Spotify yesterday, and obviously I just typed in Peter Green, not Fleetwood Mac, but Peter Green songs. Is it Slabo Day? It's like 5 or 6 million hits or views.
Wow.
What an amazing song!
Yeah, I think because
and he did that with half a brain, which is amazing.
Yeah, but I think you need to be a little bit careful because at the time, Snowy White, a guy called Snowy White, who's a massive, he's Peter Green style player. He was working with Peter Green, so I'm not sure if Snowy White played all that guitar, or if you'd never know because Snowy White really does sound like Peter Green sometimes, and he has.
So apparently, Ramon, Peter Green's just playing the chords, but the lead work is Snowy, from what I've read.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and he has the. He has the out of phase. What do this? He has that sort of out of phase sound. his goal tour.
Can I add 2 more questions, please, before time runs out?
Certainly.
Sure.
Yeah. Have you ever met or heard Danny Kirwan play?
No. Before I answer that question, I just want to say I made an incorrect statement previously about Eric Clapton going to Greece. The chronological sort of timescale of his martial amp in Greece, but it would be so. But I just want to say about that Greece thing before I forget. It'd be really interesting to get your viewers, if anybody's got any knowledge of what happened in Greece, what amp he took to Greece. That's what point I was trying to make.
Okay. Cool.
So to come forward digress to your question now, which I've forgotten. What was your question? Sorry.
Obviously, I mean, Peter Green, you mentioned the word humble, you mentioned the word softly spoken, you mentioned the word graceful.
Mm-hmm.
He was more than happy to share his guitar technique and stuff with Danny Kirwan.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Danny Kirwan. That's it. Yeah. Amazing. Well, actually, my style of playing, if I can be so bold here, is in the middle of Peter Green and Danny Kirwan. When I try and play like Peter Green, I don't sound like Peter Green. I sound kind of in the middle of those two because I've always listened to them as a pair. So, and they just worked so well. They were beautiful together. You know, that Boston Tea Party live album is a mecca for any blues aspiring young guitar player.
Like It This Way is just unbelievable, isn't it?
Absolutely. And
that's like guitar playing in friendship. Beyond, it's almost like Allman Brothers. Like you can't get closer than that.
No, and Danny Kirwan wasn't specifically a blues guitar player. He was very influenced by Django Reinhardt,
big time.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And obviously Hank Marvin. So you had a slightly different influence there.
And like Peter Green said, he said, "I've never met anybody in my whole life with the most wonderful vibrato."
Absolutely, yeah. He had this very, very unique way of vibrating the notes, and the thing about him, I think your question as well was, where did he go and what happened to him? And again, and that is another sad story. But interestingly, very, very quickly, somebody came in and I did an interview with a guy that said he knew him, and I just put it out there on my YouTube channel, and I don't know if it's true, I don't know if it's not, but this seems convinced that he knew the real Danny Kirwan. So the story's out there.
Wow.
It's up to you guys to determine what you think. But by all accounts, Peter Green said he had a perfect pitch. He had his. Danny Kirwan was the catalyst for Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac and the Fleetwood Mac you hear now. Without Danny Kirwan, Kiln Farm and all those albums.
Kiln House is a fantastic album. Kiln House reminds me of the beach, the country, medieval, pharmaceuticals, cups of tea, possibly a little bit of greenery. All the above. Earl Grey, more Earl Grey than Bell tea, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's when they went to that studio, which I can't remember the name of the studio in America.
It was a house. Yeah, it was a house. Oh, it's called Kiln House.
Yeah. When they met, is it Lindsey Buckingham when they met the couple, the
Future Games, Christine McVie, Stevie Nicks,
and her
Lindsey
boyfriend.
Buckingham.
And they went to the beach and met a penguin. Is that right? A penguin?
I don't know about that, but what I know is that album that they made with those two, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. If you listen to that kind of
that's a solo album. That's a solo album. Polydor, 1969. Yeah. Yeah,
but when they joined with Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, and they recorded in the studio, I can't remember the name of the studio, but it's in America somewhere. It's a famous studio. And when they recorded that album, you can hear Danny Kirwan's influence on that album. They were already heading in that direction thanks to Danny Kirwan, because Danny Kirwan took them away.
And don't forget Bruce. Is it Bruce Welch?
Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Do you mean Sound City Studios, Ramon?
Sound City Studios. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Which is they had a documentary about that time in Los Angeles, a rundown old warehouse with Tom Petty, Jackson Brown,
Nirvana's album. Recorded there.
Another question there, Ramon, and Andrew and I have talked about this, and I think Simon's also mentioned it. So you got your guitar in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you play a G bar chord, please?
Well, there's two.
A G.
How you want to play it? I mean,
a G bar chord, just a G bar, a G major.
So I can play it like that.
Yes, please.
Like or I can play my favourite one, which is this one.
So if you can play a G major bar chord, please.
Yeah. Okay.
And then now do a G minor pentatonic scale.
D minor. So that's
no a G a G minor pentatonic scale. Okay. And then play the second register with the G note on the bottom second string where you do the box pattern, where Albert King and all those guys do the solo.
That one?
Oh, okay, cool. Can you please go to the third register where you play the G note at the E bar chord on the third G string?
So are we talking this, that?
No. Go to the E shape pattern.
So the E
on the 12th fret. 12th fret.
Yep.
Third string G note.
Third string. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Who taught Eric Clapton that little box pattern? Because that was unheard of before that, and Peter Green followed suit.
Are you talking about this one? That one.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
It was never heard of. Did Eric Clapton get that from Matt Guitar Murphy? He single-handedly opened up a new world with that little box pattern.
You know, you're right, because Freddie King's version, you know, if you're talking Hideaway, would have been, you know, whereas Eric Clapton played it here.
Yeah.
And like you say, he would have, well, like you're saying, he would have got that from Matt Murphy rather than Freddie King, who was playing it here.
Yeah. So there's the third register. You got the G box pattern, third fret.
Yeah.
Then you've got the box pattern with the lead guitar down there, but you go up to the 12th fret there.
Yep.
Him and Peter Green just wail there. Where did Eric get that information from? That's just, I don't know.
Well, this is the thing. Here's the deal. I'm going to come back to how to learn music from a record. Jimmy Page is the one. When you learn a Jimmy Page riff and then you go and see him playing it in concert, it's never the same. Jimmy Page will always play it in a different place. Wherever you think Jimmy Page is playing it on the guitar, it will never be the place where you learn by it. So obviously Eric Clapton, he's instead of learning it here, he thought, oh, it's here. Because he can't see Freddie King playing that. He can only hear Freddie King playing that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he's not going to see.
Do you think it's also because they have their fingers are slightly smaller? Albert King, B.B. King got these big fat black fingers that, in order for them to get that beautiful mid-tone vibrato, had to play up the neck, maybe, or
I don't think so. I think I have. I don't know if you can see this. I have big hands, not big hands. I have fat hands. They're like a sausage fingers. You know, so. I play 11. I can't play 8s. If I play 8s, my hands are too fat for 8s. So when the King, Freddie King, for example, he plays, you know, Delta style. A lot of them played with their fingers or thumb. You know what I mean? So it's, you know, they'll play on the back pickup and get this real stinging.
Yeah.
You know, whereas Clapton's coming in with a very fluid, playing with the plectrum.
Yeah.
Whereas Freddie King is, you know, playing,
which is very much more Delta, very country picking,
more rougher, and it's really playing the guitar. You know, whereas Clapton's playing 8s, he's very fluid, very different. You know, different thing happening.
Because Stevie Ray Vaughan, as good as he was, stuck to the first and the second register. If he wanted to get clever, he'd play an octave higher. But he never did that third register, which Eric and Peter Green do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just how you learn your part. Yeah,
it must be a BB King jazzy thing. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this comes back to learning. When you're playing jazz, you learn to play over a song. You learn a song. So, for example, if you're learning Blue Bossa, which is the famous piece, you might, the shapes you're going to use. When you go to the 2/5, you're going to play in that part of the neck for that.
Yeah.
Every song has a shape. It might be your shape is going to be different from everyone else's shape. So, Eric Clapton, that Hideaway. His shape that he's playing the song is here.
Yeah.
And when he wants to get really, turn it up a gear, he's going to, he's going to come here on the 12th fret too.
Yeah.
He's already in this kind of, so that.
Another thing that Eric did on that the double crossing time solo that no one else did was the double string slur. Could you play at the 15th fret where he bends two strings at the same time? You know what I'm talking about?
What I can do, you mentioned stepping out, didn't you?
Yeah.
Stepping out for me was what cut Eric Clapton a little bit higher than everyone else, because stepping out has this great swing rhythm, So if I just do like a 12-bar passage now of stepping out, it's actually really, really difficult to do. I mean, so you've got that rhythm, yeah? It's actually that for me is what really set him apart from everyone else, is the fact that he could just solo effortlessly over.
And he's basically soloing of that
that rhythm. He's cut. If you cut all the music away, just for the solo, that rhythm's in the solo. And that rhythm,
it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then that stepping out and double crossing time, we mentioned about the G box at the 3rd fret, octave higher at the 15th fret, but he actually travels the whole fretboard. Which is unbelievable, unheard of at that time.
Yeah, he studied.
Stevie Ray Vaughan has that safety net. He knows what he likes. He likes double stops. He likes the shuffle pattern, but he always sticks in that box pattern. In the box pattern. Which is great. That's him. But Eric Clapton took it to another level of. It's hard to explain.
Yeah, I mean, Stevie Ray Vaughan. He was he was. I always think of Stevie Ray Vaughan as, almost had this like Jaco Pastorius did on bass, just a really amazing hands, very heavy. And like you said, I think Stevie Ray Vaughan would work things out. So he'd know what more or less what licks to use on. So you see one show to another, you're going to get pretty much the same thing. You know what I mean? Whereas Clapton, Cream would be totally a different experience every single time, depending on how much LSD or how little LSD taken.
Was that there's a famous album called What's Shaking? It's on Elektra, and so it had the prelude to Cream, which it had Eric Clapton, Stevie Winwood. I forgot who the drummer was, and they did a version of Stepping Out.
Blind Faith.
Yeah. It was 66. So once again, you could see from the Yardbirds to the Blues Breakers, Eric Clapton was the sponge absorbing so much.
Absolutely. There was a famous progression I think he used around, the progression which kind of went. progression that sort of Clapton sort of used a lot.
Which is White Room and Tales of Brave Ulysses.
Yeah, and he was. I think he even took it to Blind Faith with him on one tune. So Clapton. I think this is where Clapton had really taking the blues thing as far as he could, and then he wanted to learn other aspects of music, and that's why he dropped the whole blues thing really, because he just wanted to get into songwriting and learning about harmony and chords and just take it somewhere else. He'd reached the peak. He couldn't go anywhere else. That was it.
I was reminded, I was unfortunate. I gave these magazines away. I never should have. It was a famous guitar magazine. 1996 had Otis Rush on the cover with Buddy Guy. Otis Rush has his white strap behind his back. And it had a Peter Green special with about 4 or 5 pages interviewing. And Peter Green was pretty coherent. Someone interviewed Peter Green, and he said, and this is the exact words, and I asked him about Eric Clapton. Peter Green says, beaming, this is the exact word, beaming into his cup of tea on a special night, there was nothing like Eric Clapton.
This is why I respect Eric Clapton myself personally, because the reason Cream split up was because he read I think it was in Rolling Stone magazine, I'm not sure, it was in some American publication, and he read this review about Cream. I think it was a live concert, and this reviewer is saying they're basically they're not jazz, it's not blues, it's just like kind of egotistical, showing off.
Yep.
Reviewer, this is just this guy's opinion.
Yep.
Bullshit.
It was a little bit like when the Carpenters read that review about the dumpy chick and she turned anorexic.
Yeah, and exactly that. And Clapton read that review and said, right, that's it. I don't want to be part of this because number one, I'm plagiarizing, the Chicago, the black African American black blues guitar players. I'm plagiarizing that. It's not original. I'm not playing jazz. I can't play jazz, but I'm putting it out there as this kind of improvisational music. And he all of a sudden his world kind of, he's probably on heroin or I don't know what. I don't think he was on heroin then, but it wasn't a good time for him. And he just
he probably felt bad. I would feel bad if I was a great guitar player and half these college kids and 17-year-olds who probably still lived at home were zonked out of their minds. Like this ain't really music. I mean, I'm playing music, but these guys are just getting off on some stratosphere.
Let's not forget too that in Clapton's biography, he gives us some details about his experiences in Cream, and he's not putting the boot into Ginger, but it was difficult for him to be around Ginger, and when they got together and formed Blind Faith, and he says that he had that same feeling that he had with Ginger in Cream. Ginger could be a difficult guy to work with and live and tour with.
Yep. And I didn't realise Ginger Baker was like 6'2".
Yeah.
He's a tall man. Did you hear that famous story when Jack Bruce was about to pass away and they had this love-hate relationship like brothers, and Jack wanted to get the last word and he says, "Hey, Ginger, I'm dying." Hung up the phone and then disconnected the phone, and Jack got the last word. Did you hear that story?
I didn't hear that story, but it would.
No.
That's a good story. That's a good story, Carl.
It's a true story. It's a true story. Yeah.
I mean,
wow.
The thing with Cream, I've been out in the Sahara Desert, where the nearest town is 100 kilometers away, and I've caught a ride in a Toyota 4x4, and the only cassette in this guy's Toyota was, Tales of Ulysses, or the album, but he had a Cream album, and he had a Dire Straits as well. He had Dire Straits, and he had Cream. This is out in the Sahara Desert in the middle of nowhere, so that's how far that music reached, and people love it.
Oh wow, is that right? And what fascinates me about Cream, and Andrew and I have talked about this on Instagram, and I've just been fascinated by these obscure photos, the first tour, the second tour of the Americas, is in that short amount of time, Eric played obviously the Gibson SG. He played a Firebird with a single pickup, the 355, flirted with a Les Paul. He played 4 or 5 Gibsons in a short amount of time. Did he have a soft spot for anyone, or it blows my mind?
Well, in my opinion, I've said this on my channel. I've said that he was playing 8s, so he was playing very, very light string gauge, and the scale length as well on the Gibson is different to a Fender. And I think he just felt really comfortable. That was his technique. That was what was working for him. And obviously, it was the Chicago guys were playing Gibsons. And then obviously Clapton came along, and maybe he felt a bit reticent playing a Stratocaster because your competition's Jimi Hendrix, and
right.
And I mean, I don't know if I've got the timescale right here, but I think when Clapton did die, that is when Clapton really fully went and became a Strat player.
Is there do you know of any particular recording on wax? And it's just intrigued me, where Eric's playing a Firebird on a particular song on a record.
Yeah, it was called the Super Sessions when he's playing with.
I've seen that with Buddy Guy.
Yeah, that's the best thing to watch.
Yeah. But I'm talking about it actually on wax, like Wheels of Fire or Goodbye Cream or Disraeli Gears.
Yeah, good question.
I'm just.
I don't want to say anything, on broadcast now and get it wrong. So let me come back to you on that one.
Okay. I've got a funny feeling Disraeli Gears is pretty much probably dominated by the full, right? The SG.
Yeah, but also the Black Custom 3 pickup custom.
Of the Gibson Les Paul.
Yeah, that was recorded at Atlantic Studios in America, and he had 2 guitars on that session. He had the full SG and he had the Black Custom.
Wow!
So,
wow!
Bear in mind, you could be listening to the Custom.
Wow!
I think he used that Custom with when he cut the Aretha Franklin track. I think he
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then that's what coincided with his friendship with Dwayne Olam when Dwayne Olam played on the Wilson Pickett Hey Jude song, right?
That was at Muscle Shoals. Was that at Muscle Shoals or was that Atlanta?
So see, Dwayne was mainly a Gibson guy, but that particular track he cut, it was on a Strat, wasn't it? Or yeah. So
Strat.
Wow.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So that's amazing. I mean that's why. I mean, Andrew and I have talked about this many a time. In that 3 years, Eric Clapton's he's wearing a cowboy hat. He's wearing a cheese cutter. He's got a crowbar moustache. He's clean shaven. He's got a full beard. He's got long sideburns. He's got aviator sunglasses. He's just a chameleon.
He's got a
perm.
Yeah,
he's just he's unbelievable.
One of my favorite periods actually was when he was hanging out with Denny Lane, the Faces bass player. Is that right?
That's Ronnie Lane.
That's Ronnie Lane. Denny Lane's from.
I think you're thinking about Denny's. Denny's being in the lane in America. It was a restaurant.
That's Bonnie and Delaney. I'm thinking, but no, Ronnie Lane. Sorry,
Denny Lane was in the Moody Blues, wasn't he? That's right. He was in the first incarnation, wasn't he? Of the Moody Blues. Yeah. Denny Lane, not to be confused with Ronnie, not his brother.
Yes. And I think Ronnie Lane, I don't know if he'd been, he knew about his MS at that time, but he got a farm. He bought a farm with his wife. And then they had this crazy idea of having this band. So it's an amazing documentary. And they went round England and they couldn't get any gigs. And it was a disaster. It cost loads of money. And they were going with all this farm equipment, like old steamrollers and an old bus. And it was you got to see this documentary. It's out on YouTube. It's hilarious. But Eric Clapton was actually going there and hanging out with them, and he wrote a lot of people's worst song, "Wonderful Tonight." He wrote that song in that farm with Ronnie Lane, sitting around a fire. But his whole fashion at that time was.
I thought that song was based around his wife taking too long to wear the makeup, and he was getting pissed off, and it was like. You look wonderful tonight. Let's get the hell out of here and get to the club.
But he wrote that song around Ronnie Lane's farm, but if you look at his fashion around that time, it was farmer's gear because he was at Ronnie Lane's. So it's kind of funny. He's gone from this psychedelic.
Is that the Ramon? Is that the tour where they had the tent? Is that the tour with the tent?
Yeah, that's
yeah.
And Clapton really liked hanging out with Ronnie Lane, and And it's quite sad, how Ronnie Lane, ended up.
Model sclerosis.
Yeah, and they did the Arms concerts as well, which I would advise anyone to check out, because you see Clapton. I think Clapton's playing in the Explorer.
That's correct.
Wow. Yes, yellow one.
Yeah, he's playing an Explorer. He does, and
pre Kirk Hammett, I think.
Absolutely, and Jimmy Page, although he's probably on some heavy stuff, alcohol or drugs, I don't know what, but he comes and does a solo version of Stairway Heaven, which is really good actually, considering all things considered.
Oh, he was smashed out of his mind. He's wearing all black, playing a black tally. His hair was unkept. He had a cigarette in his mouth.
Wasn't he on heroin then still? He smacked out.
He was heavy on junk. And about that same time, he showed up to an Aerosmith concert too.
So, that's the one. That's a
Ronnie Lane bus. Just a laugh. With Ronnie Lane in it.
There was a question brought up by one of the audiences about Paul Kossoff with the Black Gibson. And I would like to bring this up if you don't mind.
I know where that is.
So Free's first album, which I own, which is a masterpiece, it's very rare, and there's an amazing song called "About a Mover," and I think Paul Rodgers was.
She's about a mover.
Yeah,
Doug Song.
No. I'm a mover or something. It's a slightly different title. But cut a long story short, I think Paul Rodgers was 17, the singer. But anyway, Paul Kossoff basically, I wouldn't say he stole the woman tone, but was heavily influenced by the Eric Clapton Disraeli Gears sound.
Big time.
Unbelievable.
They were all watching Clapton. Clapton was the guy. Everybody wanted to work with Clapton. Everyone wanted to know him. He was. Peter Green was a huge fan. Peter Green.
Oh, big time. So that Gibson, the Marshall was at 10, and the tone was rolled all the way off. Is that right?
There's probably experts. Because the way I saw it, there's one way you could do it, and Eric Clapton actually explains how to do this on a video, so you can go and check out that video. But the obvious thing would be to go on the neck pickup and just roll the tone off, and then. So that would be the obvious way is to just go on this pickup here. You roll the tone right off, and you get this very. That's amazing.
Ramon, can you do me a favour?
Yeah, sure.
Don't tell Albert King, but Eric Clapton, when he did the Strange Brew solo, copied it note from Pretty Woman.
Well, it's really funny because my friend Davey Woodford on Facebook, he's a great player in Greece, recorded Strange Brew, and he asked me, could I play on it? And so I thought, I'll do my own solo, but I'm going to copy Clapton's licks, And when I was doing them, I was thinking, what a genius Clapton was playing these amazing licks. Now you've just told me they weren't his.
Isn't that you're a genius? They steal things if you're ordinary, you borrow them or something.
You listen to "Oh Pretty Woman," and it's note for note.
Yeah.
And actually, here's another. I'll give you one more little nugget because I've got quite a few, but I can only share a few at a time. There's a famous album called Hoodoo Man Blues, Buddy Guy and Junior Wells,
right?
And there's a song called Hey Lordy Mama.
Yep.
And if you want to just demonstrate for us now, hammering on the A on the 5th fret. Da-dun.
Are you talking?
Yeah. That's the Strange Brew start.
Oh yeah, so because you got yeah, it's that. It's that kind of vibe,
So that's where he got that from. So that if anyone wants to learn how to play the blues, obviously we talk about blues breakers here at Clapton, but Hoodoo Man Blues, which was the first Chicago band recorded live, but actually in the studio, which was Buddy Guy and Eric Clapton's, Buddy Guy and Julie Wells 66. But Hey Lordy Mama was the prelude to Strange Brew. So Buddy Guy's rhythm was the rhythm to Strange Brew, and then the solo was Pretty Woman from Albert King. So they're not necessarily stealing; they're just kindly borrowing.
Absolutely, and I've said this time and time again. Clapton, however good he is, he'll be the first to tell you that everything he got was from Chicago, from the legends.
Absolutely, he never lied. He never hid who was. And the same thing with Keith Richards, and we've discussed this a few times on the show. That's one of the reasons why we have a lot of respect for them, Ramon, because unlike Jimmy Page, who may have been a little bit cagey about where he got a few of the songs from and the riffs from, Clapton and Keith Richards were very clear right from the word go. And Brian Jones, they said very clearly, it's these guys in America.
I got a phone call from Jimmy Page saying, "Carl, can you please bail me out of jail because of infringement and copyright laws?" And then I saw a YouTube video of all the songs that Jimmy stole. I said, "Sorry, Jimmy, I can't help you."
Well,
there's about 10 or 12.
Yeah,
I mean, babe, I'm gonna leave you. Dazed and Confused, Lemon Song. There's just so many.
Well,
those things all go round, don't they? I mean, Page got it from whoever, and then whoever got it from whoever. How far back do you want to go in? Getting these things and taking them to new things.
One more nugget I'll share. There's a famous story. So that Hideaway lick, I think Howling Wolf came up with it. Elmore James had toyed with it, and then Freddie King, I think, didn't steal it, but got it first on wax. And that's how it started.
I mean, I just want to tell you something else. So if you're playing Delta Blues, there's a lick in Delta Blues which goes like this, and I've kind of done it on top of mine.
Skip James or Mississippi John Hurt? Skip James or Mississippi John Hurt?
This is quite an obscure artist. I can't remember his name. My friend Dave Rubin, who's a New York journalist, he told me who it was. And that, so it's all that kind of that sound. I just want to do this one thing, guys. So David Graham. That wasn't the song, by the way. That was me tuning up the guitar. But so this is
that sounds Led Zeppelin-ish.
Yeah, it's just David Graham came up with that. What is it? Which is David Graham. She moved through the fair. But then Jimmy Page took it, to the Led Zeppelin.
White Summer or something. Yeah.
Oh, unbelievable. Kashmir, all that sort of stuff. Traveling Riverside, Mountainside, whatever it's called.
Yeah, and
you got Riverside Blues.
That's it.
You got all those sort of rhythms that you can do, and it sounds very Indian because you.
Ramon, I'm going to ask you a very hard-hitting question, and Andrew and I butt heads on this because Andrew's a big Eric Clapton fan.
Yeah.
And there's only so much time we have in life, and there's only so much music to listen to.
Yeah.
And I love Eric Clapton, but I'm an Eric Clapton guy that plays a Gibson. Does that make sense? I'm an Eric with the Gibson guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to put him down as far as a Strat guy because I know that he wanted to cast the net wider. He wanted to get into country, did a bit of reggae, singer-songwriter, pop rock, you name it. Fantastic career. I love it. But for me, Eric is, me personally, my heart of hearts, when he played that Gibson in the 60s, it was pretty close to heaven. So
well, I think what's happening there is that you're just taking a bite of the apple, Carl. You're not actually, digesting the whole apple. That's certainly it's certainly a nice juicy bite that you're taking hold of, but there's a lot more there. Look, that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask Ramon, is that a lot of people say that Clapton's tone and his gear, Ramon, stopped being significant and meaning anything in past 1968. Obviously, I'm a Clapton nut, and Carl's already mentioned that. You look at the Journeyman album, for example, and some of the tones that he's getting with that Steve Winwood live and Cream 2005. That tone he's getting with the Stratocaster on that on those Fender amps. That's pretty good. Pretty good.
He's evolved now, and you've got people like Joe Bonamassa copying him with his Tweed Fender amps. You've got John Mayer, who's basically copied the whole concept, because Eric Clapton's concept is pop blues. That's what he was doing after the 80s. A lot of, when he got the big deal, the big record contract, that's why he started wearing suits, because previously to that, he was touring with Chaz and Dave as a support act and wearing farmer's gear. But then he got this multi-million-dollar record company deal, and then he had to up his game, wear the Armani suits, and that's why you saw that transformation, because there was a lot of money.
And he had the parted hair and the Lamborghinis and the Italian model girlfriends, right? Didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was the Fender signature guitar deal. it was all that part of that corporate image that Ramon's. So he was trapped a little bit by that. Do you
Phil
think?
Collins?
Phil Collins as well. I mean, who we love and
blame Phil.
I don't discount him for that at all. I think he's a wonderful musician. All I'm saying is when he played those Gibsons, it was just like, for me, it was just, it's hard to describe. It's just unbelievable. Yeah. Andrew and I have talked about this before. The guitar solo on Born Under a Bad Sign in Cream is just majestic. It's just unbelievable. I mean, you've got guys like Jimi Hendrix and Buddy Guy are just like, who the hell's this 22-year-old 5'9" skinny English guy? What the hell's he doing? We've been through hell and back,
I think Ginger Baker summed it up really well, because Ginger Baker was a great jazz drummer, and Ginger Baker said, look, when Gary Moore worked with us, it wasn't the same. Gary Moore couldn't, we love Gary Moore, but Gary Moore just couldn't improvise. He didn't have that rhythmic quality and that fluidity that Eric Clapton had.
Wow.
Ginger Baker just said it wasn't the same. He wasn't on the same level. No way. And Clapton couldn't play jazz, but had he learned jazz, he would be a great jazz musician. But he couldn't play it. But if he had spent the time learning jazz, he'd be up there with the best. You could tell that his mind was.
I've been really enjoying watching just these snippets of How Hard Rock and Roll, Chuck Berry's 60th birthday, and Eric Clapton's playing a Strat. He's in just mufti casual clothes, probably a nice cashmere 100% tweed shirt, just really relaxed, playing a Strat, and he's just so good. You can hear the Chuck Berry singing through his guitar solo. And then Keith comes along and does his second solo, and it's rough, raw, and rugged. But they both complement each other because they're so different, but they're so good. But you're right. Eric had this fluidity, this timing, this sweet touch that's just unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean, what's great about, I've slagged off Keith Richards somewhat in this interview, but this meetup. But Keith Richards is man. We love Keith Richards. He's fantastic. You've got to love it.
Legendary.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're fans of Keith.
When you talk about that Arms concert and all those English guys, all from the similar area, came on to do the I think the finale, the encore of Stewart of Heaven. Keith didn't know the chords to Stewart of Heaven. It was just beyond his scope. He's just not that sort of person.
He doesn't need to know. Again, the thing. This is what I come back to. The thing, like in the Shadows, they had the lead guitarist, okay, and then they had the rhythm guitar player, right? And Keith Richards, he's the rhythm guitar player, and it's a lost art. There's nothing wrong with just being a rhythm guitarist. If you're, Freddie Green, is it Freddie Green, jazz guy in
Grant Green.
No, Freddie Green.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Green. He played with Count Basie or something. But
okay,
he'd be doing these chords, just a really simple chord, very simple shapes, because that's all you can.
A bit like Malcolm Young, the anchor of the band.
It would be very, very simple style, but that's all you could hear. He was playing in a big Stromberg jazz guitar, huge guitar, huge telegraph, pole as strings, wires as strings, and just, but it had this incredible groove, and that's all he needed to do. He didn't need anything else, that's all he, and that's what made him a great rhythm guitar player, and there's a lot of guys that are doing the icing on the cake, but you need the meat and potatoes. You need that rhythm, and Keith Richards is one of those dudes, that can do it. Mark Knopfler's another guy. Mark Knopfler, I learnt a lot of his style.
And one of the other unsung heroes.
Freddie Green.
Yeah, one of the other unsung heroes from that British movement, which is funnily enough because he was a Brit, was Albert Lee.
Albert Lee, another guy, Mr. Country Boy. He's famous for working with Emilio Harris. One of the best ever country guitarists in the world, and he's from Kent or somewhere.
What the hell is he doing there?
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
Albert Lee.
Yeah, I think that's where he's from, but it's from the Midlands, or maybe he's from Birmingham, maybe he's from Newcastle, Newcastle.
Yeah.
But
these guys are amazing. Yeah.
It's funny how like you get. It's like Rod Templeton, Rob Templeton, who wrote for Michael Jackson and George Benson. This guy, I think he's from Kent or somewhere, or Lincoln. And then he's working with Quincy Jones as one of the main songwriters of the 80s, and they're just guys you might sit down your local pub in England and.
Albert Lee's from Herefordshire. In case
you
go. Born in Herefordshire,
West Country.
Unfortunately, I'll have to close out soon. But Ramon, were you ever fortunate enough to? I'm not going to guess your age because you just don't do that. Because
thank you very much.
I'm late.
Young.
I'm late. I'm late 20s, early 30s, maybe touching 40. Have you ever seen Wilco Johnson in his prime with the Dr.
Yes.
Feelgood?
I saw him.
How was that? Because I'm a massive fan.
No, I saw him in Colchester at the local arts centre in Colchester. There was is it Norman Watt? I can't remember the bass player's name. He sat down.
Norman Watt Roy from Ian during the Blockheads, on bass,
he was with him. And I got to tell you, this guy, I think he was playing like a black Telecaster through an H&H amp, solid state amp, or something very. And it was the most cutting, incredible. It was like, that's how you do it.
And he got that from a guy from Mick Green, who was a session guys for a
Grant McGreen.
Yeah. And that was the start of what they call punk. But how the hell did he get that chunky, massive rhythm sound from a black telly? He must have had the treble of the amp turned all the way up, and it was all that right hand, wasn't it? The right hand.
It was, and it was an H&H solid state amp because he didn't want it to go into distortion and mush. So he made a solid state amp. It wasn't valve.
So you never saw him with the Dr. Feelgood?
No, because I think Lee is it Lee Briller? I was a little bit to give you. I was 17 in the early 90s.
So you would have seen. Did you ever see Dr. Feelgood play? No. Like I said, because he had a second guitar player called Gippy Mayo.
Well, I replaced Chippy. Yeah, that's Chippy Mayo. I replaced him in a band.
Did you?
When I was 19.
I'll give you some an idea how Jippy got his.
He's dead now, isn't he? He's died, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, 3-4 years ago. But Lee Brelo said, "Shit, mate, you always got the flu. You always got the gip," and that's how he got the name Gippy Mayo.
All right.
Is Gip an English name for being sick of the flu, or?
I know him as Jippy Mayo.
Jippy.
And Jippy might mean gypsy. So it's.
Okay. I thought the Jip was a pseudonym or a code name for the flu or having a runny nose.
Jippy.
Yeah. Like I said, I knew him as Jippy. I replaced him in a band, a local singer called Jeremiah and the Marx Brothers, and he was a musician in England, and I was 19 or something. And I just had this. Jeremiah gave me this cassette, and he said, "Learn this," and I was like, "That's a really great blues guitarist." And he goes, "It's called Jippy Mayo," and he'd just gone to join the Feel Goods. They were doing a reunion or something. I think.
Oh wow, shivers. Yeah.
But I never met him, obviously. But I replaced him in his band.
Oh wow, that's unbelievable.
But it's nice that you brought up. Actually, it's nice that you.
Yeah. Well, I just know that these So Mick Green played, and does it Billy Kramer and the Dakotas? There's a '60s band.
Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas.
That's it. Yes, and he played the telly, and he was such a clever player. And all these guys link up. It's unbelievable. And Jimmy Page, as good as he is, I think I wouldn't call him a thief, but he was a clever thief.
Jimmy Page. For me, Jimmy Page is a great producer, and so he got a bigger picture. And he took, John Paul Jones, who was a session musician, and then he took two local musicians from Birmingham, obviously, John Bonham and Robert Plant, and he saw the potential in them. They were great musicians in their own right, but he brought them together. He had he had the knowledge, the confidence. He had all the ideas. He was going with the ideas. Three wouldn't have been able to do what.
And don't underestimate Brian Jones bringing in John Paul Jones for Satanic Majesty's request, and bringing in Nicky Hopkins, piano player extraordinaire.
Well, John Paul Jones is an amazing musician anyway. He's a secret. The guys. He is. He can sight read. Jimmy Page was a session musician, but he couldn't sight read music.
What does sight read mean? Play by ear?
It means that you get a piece of music.
Sheet music. You can read it.
Okay.
Play it.
Wow.
There's two different things. There's sight reading. So sight reading is being able to put this and read it as you play. And music reading, which is what I do, is you need a few goes.
Yeah. One quick thing, and I don't want to get slightly off topic. And I just discovered him when I was just getting rid of this house to move into another house. Graham Parker and the Reunion. Is that right? Graham Parker.
Graham Parker and the
Rumour. That's right. That's a phenomenal band. That's an amazing band.
Check them out.
Yeah. But getting back to the blues. So the Wilco and Lee Brelo, in 1974 when they recorded Down by the Jetty, they told the record company, "We're such blues purists, we're only recording this in mono." I think that was the last mono recording in English history.
Really?
Yep.
Well,
I was going
to say the Blues Breakers album was recorded originally in mono because all the pop albums in those days were recorded in mono, and the classical albums were recorded in stereo. That's how albums were made in those days. But then John Mell and Mike Vernon actually remixed it into stereo, and there was a stereo release. That was all.
That came out in '69. I'm kicking myself. I sold that. And I did some research about 2 hours ago before the show, and I'm kicking myself because you can hear Eric's guitar playing on the right hand of the mix. Yeah. But the ultimate version is the mono because John Mayall on record has said that's how we wanted it. It has the most punch, and it's most authentic, and it's got the magic.
Well, that's why those Beatles remasters are not so good because, like, for example, the song Day in the Life, that was mixed for mono. That was mixed as it should be. And when they tidied it up, they got rid of some distortion, which was a mistake. That distortion was part of the recording.
I love stereo because you have the width, you have the separation. I want to hear the guitar player like Mick Taylor at Get Your Ayers out tucked away in that corner, but we didn't have that luxury in the 60s with the 2-track. So we basically Glyn Johns, George Martin, John Mayall, Mike Vernon, they all basically said emphatically they wanted mono, it was recorded mono, and mono was how it should sound.
Yeah, that was the ethos back then, and
that's all the blues recordings were mono.
Yeah, and they were quite harshly actually. They were very bright recordings because by the time it got to vinyl, things would mellow out. You see?
Yes.
So everything was about being really harsh and bright, and the end result was nice and mellow and sweet. But if you would have listened to the masters on the 2-track, you would have gone, "Whoa, that's really harsh."
It's been about 5 years since I had I had probably one of the most nicest hi-fi stereos in the country, and I had to sell it because I got into a certain business. But the difference between the Beano album and the Hard Road, very similar recordings. As far as mono punch, just liquidity.
I think the difference between those two albums is the Beano was a snapshot of the band live, whereas I think the Hard Road was a little bit more thought out, a little bit maybe more planned, a little more,
bit more produced.
Yeah.
Do you know personally yourself, being an Englishman, obviously a purist like ourselves, what happened to those live recordings that didn't make the par? Didn't quite cut the mustard, as they say.
The ones at the Flamingo.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
I think was that Jack, the one with Jack Bruce on bass?
Yes.
Yes.
I think maybe it was his fault. Maybe he played loads too much, overplayed.
Because that was Mike's idea, was basically getting a working class English band with energy, play it live. But it didn't happen. So they took that live atmosphere obviously into the Decca studio, where you, thank God, are outside saying basically this is where it happened.
Oh yeah, you saw the video, didn't you? Of,
yeah, I did. Yeah, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what can I say? I don't know if they're available, but I can ask Mike Vernon. I can personally ask Mike Vernon about that if you want.
Yeah.
Next time I speak to him.
But no one knows where these tapes are, because I don't care how bad they are. I would love to hear them.
We want them. Yeah, we want them.
There's a famous. It's actually on. It's a John Mayall double album called, I think, Through the Years. And there's a bleed out of about 3 live songs. Stormy Monday.
Yes.
And but the recordings are very average, but you can hear it just obviously how amazing Eric is. I mean, can you see my fingers? 3 songs.
Right. Yeah. Imagine. Well, this is the magic of the Beano thing. This is when you put that album on, especially for me when I was 17 learning guitar. You hear the live rapport of the band. Modern days you don't get that sound because people don't play live anymore. They don't record live, but that's that magic that you capture. I mean, Jimmy Page, that's what he was trying to do on Led Zeppelin 1 and 2. Basically recreate the Blues Breakers album, that live feel. It was all about the live take, the live feel, and so imagine hearing that in the context of a club. In the
wow. Ramon, just pretend to be Eric Clapton for 30 seconds right now. Okay. You've got quite a big ego. You've met Hendrix. You've just done the Beano album. Okay.
Here we go.
And you've just heard the guitar solo to Looking Back by Peter Green, and then all of a sudden you've heard the guitar solo, the instrumental Supernatural. What's going through your mind?
I think he liked Peter Green. He acknowledged him, but for him, he was moving forward with Cream, and Peter Green wasn't a threat to him. The only person that was a threat to him was Hendrix.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
But he met Hendrix, and you've got this guy who's very angry, but he's English. The whole restraint, anger, restraint. 1960s. Yeah. Kid. meeting this flamboyant Hendrix, who's like, "Hey man, how's it? You know, America."
A massive black wig.
Yeah,
A
100%,
By jam.
you know, with the ladies, and I think, and Clapton was just like in awe.
Gobsmacked.
Yeah,
But I can tell from a human perspective, if I was Clapton and I heard the guitar solo looking back, or possibly Supernatural, I would be, ego aside, I'd be extremely humbled.
I don't think he would have been too. Maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe he would have heard it. Maybe not. I don't think it would have bothered him much because he was going on a different trajectory with Cream.
Okay.
It was new music. Right. That was old. That he'd done that. He was going to Cream, which was imagine that time there was no Cream. He's inventing Cream as he's going along. There was rock. There was he's on the frontier. Pete Green is just following what he did.
Well, because Andrew and I had a bit of a joke the other day. You know, he basically went from the Roosters with the 15-watt portable amp that you carry around in your pocket to an AC30 in Yardbirds to a 45-watt JTM 45 blues breaker to a stack with Cream. Just basically every situation you're growing and bigger and louder. You know,
because I mean,
and obviously bigger arenas, bigger followings.
Yeah, and the only reason they had those stacks was one reason only, was because the guitar was not put through the PA. Neither was the bass. Only the drums and the vocal.
Nope.
So they had to have those big stacks. It was later it became a gimmick, and it was like, look how big my stack is. But back in the day, it was it was purely functional.
Yep. I did not know that.
I think it was wasn't it Black Sabbath that really invented the massive PA? I'm sure I've read that somewhere. They were the ones who started having these wacky great towers of speakers and stuff. I'm pretty sure it is them. I mean, Ramon, I worked in a record shop in the 80s, and I worked for a guitar guy who played rock and roll guitar, and he was in the first band ever to play at the Colston Hall in Bristol. Mike Tobin in the back, and he had a picture of it, and basically the PA is those two tiny little strip PAs that you can hardly see on this stage. The two guitarists are masking the single Vox AC30 they're both playing through. The only piece of kit you can see is the bass amp and the drums. It's like, where's all the kit on this massive stage? It's very funny. But those tiny strip PAs.
Yeah, and I think the Beatles, when they played Share Stadium, I'm not sure if this is correct, but it could be that even the guitars came out of the amps. They didn't even come out of the PA. It was crazy.
No, I don't think so. No, I think that's right. I think then it wasn't PA. You're right. They'd have stacks to make a big enough noise to get to the back of the third row.
Ridiculous. And so that's where, it was coming with PAs. Then developed into, Led Zeppelin were one of the bands that spearheaded that. But around Cream's time, the PAs were terrible. It was a joke.
Yeah. It's really interesting that it's the pioneering thing, isn't it? It's people trying to keep up with the thing. I also think about Clapton. One thing is you go to 412 Marshalls and stacks when somebody else is carrying them. The original brief to Jim Marshall was, "I want an amp I can put into my car," wasn't it?
Yeah,
which means he was carrying it himself. Which means when I can afford to buy really big ones, I can afford then for somebody to carry them for me, which means size is less of a problem.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, it's a really good point of view to have. Yeah. Okay, guys.
Social aspect of it.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna. If this is okay.
It's only been 2.5 hours. Well done.
No, Ramon, we appreciate.
I thought we were just getting started.
Ramon, look, we appreciate you hanging out with us for the last 2.5 hours. Look, it's been a privilege. It's been a privilege and an honor for our small channel. If it's okay with you, we're on some Facebook groups, so we're happy to help grow your channel and do our little bit. So we'll share the show that we've done on a couple of Facebook groups.
Thank you so much.
And you have a open invitation to join us anytime. Carl and I and Simon, we're doing a show once a week. We're just three cats that like to hang out and talk British blues. So anytime you've got a bit of time to waste and you want to hang out, give us a yell.
I will do, and I'll try
Some
and
of us are
put it in for a
British.
beer as well.
Hey, Ramon, just a couple of quick things.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Without being partial, Mike Vernon obviously enjoyed both Peter Green and Eric Clapton, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
He never said one was better than the other.
You know what? Maybe he'd be leaning more towards Peter Green. I
Peter
think
Green.
I've read somewhere that he was.
Okay.
Peter Green
Okay. We'll push that aside then. If you do get in touch with Mike Vernon, tell him to come on the show, and we won't ask him predictable questions.
Okay.
We'll have it pre-thought out.
Yeah,
You know,
we might.
I was playing a festival last year, and it's a real shame because his band also played. It was in Germany, and we played one day, and he played the next day. And I should have actually waited. In hindsight, I should have waited to see his band, and I could have met him face to face. But he has his own band, and he does gigs. Even now, he does gigs with his own band around.
Yeah, he seems to have a real tale to tell, doesn't he, Mike Vernon? There seems to be, his tale hasn't really been told. Do you think that's true?
No, I agree with you. I think he's an unsung hero to a certain extent. Just the fact that he recorded David Bowie's first ever album, will give you a glimpse of. Go and have a look at the album.
He's amazing because he's got quite a youthful face, Mike Vernon.
We can't hear you, mate. We can't hear you. Your lips are moving, but we can't hear what you say.
Yeah, I can hear him. I can hear him. Can
you
hear him?
I can't hear him. You can hear him, Ramon, can you?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Doesn't
matter. Carry on.
Just real quickly, he's got a boundless energy when it comes to blues. He's very enthusiastic, isn't he?
He is very enthusiastic. But if you just Google now the list of albums that Mike Vernon has produced, you will be shocked.
Yep. And one more thing, and this is the last question because obviously your coffee's getting cold.
Yeah, it's astonishing, isn't it? Yeah.
What did you think of Fleetwood Mac in Chicago? That album, that double album.
It's really, really good. It's a very authentic sounding recording. It sounds just like you could put that against any of those blues albums.
It's unbelievable. I wish it was turned up just a little bit louder, but I'm glad I've got it for what it is.
Well, for me, the definitive Fleetwood Mac recording for me is live at the Boston Tea Party.
Can't beat it.
That is the Mecca.
Black Magic Woman. So basically, Eric had the woman tone, but Peter Green loved his reverb, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, what he did, I don't know if I can show you on this. He'd do. So he'd start the first half of the solo with no reverb, completely dry, and then he'd bring in that reverb for the second.
Yeah.
He'd bring it in for the second part of the solo, which was really beautiful.
Absolutely.
To hear that kind of, and he really play on the reverb.
Unbelievable.
But they go dry and they go completely dry. Dry as a whisper.
And like Keith Richards said, that famous quote, he didn't use Keith, Eric, not so much. Peter Green didn't use many pedals because they didn't like tap dancing, and then they were so drunk they wanted to make sure they stood up. Is that right?
Yeah, Clapton probably has a few pedals and stuff, but they're not pedal guys. They come from that different era. There's a lot of people saying, "Oh, did Eric Clapton use a Rangemaster?" No, of course he didn't. No way.
No.
He was amp, lead, guitar. That was it. He didn't want any stupid pedal on top of his amp to fiddle with. You know, he was more interested in, you know, other things.
And another thing that Billy Gibbons, I mean, Jimi Hendrix described Billy Gibbons as his favorite guitar player. I like Billy Gibbons. There's a lot of great stuff.
Yeah,
but Billy Gibbons has never really said, I'm a massive Peter Green fan, even though we know he is because of the way he plays.
Yeah.
Do you agree, Ramon?
No, yeah, I think he's actually gone on record. I've heard him in an interview on YouTube somewhere talk about Peter Green. You know, so
Blue Jean Blues is Peter Green without the beard.
Yeah. I mean, anybody, you know, like, look at Carlos Santana built his whole career on Black Magic Woman. You know, because what Peter Green did, as you were rightly saying, you know, and this is, you know, there's that sort of
Is that Rolling Blues? Rolling Blues?
Well, that's kind of like a Chicago rumba, you know, like a Chicago blues rumba. And then Peter Green sort of took that sort of Latin, you know, with obviously. Got a black magic woman. Got a black magic woman. And he took it to that song. He also did another song. You know, so he basically, you know, got this beautiful cone and these Latin mambo rumba rhythms. So then comes along, you know, Mr.
And don't.
You know, along comes Santana, copies the concept.
And Simon and I had this unique joke where everybody talks about Oh Well Part 1.
Yeah.
But Oh Well Part 2 is mind-blowing, unbelievable, because you can hear through Peter Green's Jewish lineage of the Sahara, the barber, the tents, the goats, eating the goats, all that sort of stuff. You can just hear it through his lineage, you know. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and he played that on a Ramirez. He actually had a Ramirez guitar from Spain, which he played.
Wow.
That. You know, and he was clever because he knew. He knew those scales. You know, he knew from ear. He learned by ear. He listened to classical music. He listened to flamenco and Spanish classical. So you know, these guys weren't one-dimensional. They were, you know, and obviously the song.
Unbelievable. So the score's 3-1, Peter to Eric.
Well, like I said, 1966, Eric in London at the Clique of Flamengo. That would have been one of the moments that you'd want to get in the time machine and go back to.
And you know what? Even Peter Green would admit that.
Yeah. Even Peter Green would. And everybody, you know, Eric Clapton, you know, you can talk to a lot of great musicians in America, you know, great musicians in jazz and blues. And they all admit that, you know, Clapton in the 60s was, you know, he's up there with everyone, you know.
Yep.
I mean, Clapton's obviously 75. I know your cup of coffee is getting.
Is he 79?
75, I think.
Do you want to just Google that? I think he's 79, if I'm not mistaken.
No, that's Charlie Watts.
No. He's 75, 76.
How old
Can you Google that, Simon?
How old is
What?
How old Eric Clapton is?
How old is he?
Yeah.
Oh, he's 75.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think he just.
So I think you're right.
You know, 21 minus 75 is what's that calculation? I don't know, 49 years.
Born in 1945, so he is 75.
So 75. Yep. How old is Andy Summers?
77.
77, yeah. Andy Summers is older, yeah.
Slightly older. That's funny, isn't it? You don't think about Andy Summers as being older than Eric.
Yeah, he's older than Clapton, yeah.
So 75 minus 21 or 22 would be 42 years.
Bill Wyman.
Sorry, Andy Summers born in 42. Sorry.
So Eric in those 42 years would have learned a lot more chords, progressions, licks, subtleties, blah, blah, blah. What the hell was he doing, thinking? What was he on at 21 with that Beano album? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. We'll close out with Ramon's final statement.
Yes, thank you.
Well,
That's very
it's like
good.
there's two things in music. You know, it's the old rule. You need 10,000 hours. You know, so if you want to really master your instrument, you need 10,000 hours. But also, another thing is that when you're young, you have more time. You know, it's not like nowadays. When you get older, you're gonna have a family, whatever, work commitments. When you're 21, you know, you have all the time in the world. You can focus. You could spend the whole night focused on learning one lick. So you got that in your favor. And also you're 21, so you're, you know, for learning, you know, you can learn in any age in life. But I think on a musical instrument, 21 is really the zone you want to, and the age you want to be if you really want to be up there, that's where you're going to get later. You get more knowledge and you get more experience and you develop a style, but
possibly a bit more complacent.
Yeah, but your big learning your learning curve is really going to happen as a musician. You need to get your technique sorted when you're younger. You know.
So he was basically raw talent. He had that 6 months. He was a blues nut. He had a lot of testosterone. He had a lot to prove. The stars aligned. He was in the right studio. He had a hot amp, a hot guitar, probably 3 girlfriends hanging outside the door waiting to see him after the show. Everything was just happening.
Well, that I didn't research, but who knows that? But so, there's a lot.
Right.
It was the right time in the right place. The right time, the right place.
Wow,
awesome.
Unbelievable.
All right, Ramon. Okay. We're conscious of the fact that you have to go. You've got a boogie. You've got to split and do something. We appreciate. I'll say one more time. Thank you very much for hanging out with us.
Thank you very much, Ramon. It's fantastic.
And really you have an open invitation to join us any time. Appreciate it.
And if you want to get a bit more star-studded, we've got one of the world's biggest Rolling Stones guys, Richard Fox.
Great.
If you want to bring Mike Vernon, Gippy, I'm sorry. We can
can't bring Gippy. Can't bring Gippy.
Sorry, we could get a famous show going.
Okay, then. I'll see what I can do. Lads. Okay, God bless. Take care.
See ya.
Take care.